You picture Christmas Eve in Manchester, 1850. Candles flickering in drafty stone houses, the smell of roasted goose filling narrow cobblestone streets, kids pressing their noses to frosted glass hoping Santa might ditch the reindeer and just show up with boots muddy from the factory floor. It's a classic Dickens painting until the beer arrives. That frothy golden Christmas ale brewed special for the season, clinking in mugs so heavy they could double as weapons. Families raise a toast to health, to joy, to surviving another brutal year of coal dust and 14-hour shifts. The first gulp tastes rich, malty, perfect. The second gulp burns a little. The third, well, that one starts killing people. Because here's the fun twist. Every single pint of that beloved holiday beer was laced with arsenic. Not on purpose, mind you. Nobody sat there twirling their mustache going, "Merry Christmas, peasants, enjoy your death juice." No, this was pure industrial stupidity. Brewers bought contaminated sugar, stirred it into the vats and served it up like liquid cheer. And within hours, the Christmas of 1850 turned from carols and puddings to convulsions and funerals. If you're wondering how to really ruin a holiday party, apparently arsenic lager does the trick. And before you say, "Wow, that sounds dark, maybe lighten the mood," let me remind you, you clicked on this video about the Christmas where everyone accidentally drank poison. You knew what you were signing up for. Besides, if this is putting you to sleep, perfect, mission accomplished. And if it isn't, hit subscribe now, because trust me, you're going to want more bedtime stories about people dropping like flies around the Christmas tree. Oh, and check the pinned comment if you need a Christmas calendar. Don't worry, I promise it's not poisoned. Probably. Now, picture being there. You've worked 6 months straight in the textile mills. Your lungs are basically black cotton candy. Your fingernails are permanently dyed blue from chemicals. But tonight, you've got beer. You've been dreaming of this pint all week. The froth drips down your beard. The warmth spreads through your stomach, and for a single moment you feel alive. Except you're not. Because that warmth is arsenic hitchhiking through your bloodstream, turning your insides into a chemical war zone. Within hours, your skin starts peeling. Your stomach cramps so violently it feels like a steel trap is snapping shut inside you. You can't breathe properly. Your vision tunnels, and every joint feels like it's filled with broken glass. Now imagine that happening, not just to you, but to your wife, your kids, your neighbors. The whole block staggering through snow-covered streets, moaning like zombies before zombies were even a thing. Instead of a midnight hymn, the air fills with the sound of vomiting and desperate prayers. And the kicker, nobody even knows why. To them, it's just a curse, a plague, God's punishment for having a second helping of pudding. Meanwhile, the pub owner is standing there scratching his head, swearing the beer was brewed exactly the same way as every other year. Here's the cruel irony. Christmas was supposed to be the one day of relief. The one day factory workers could forget about the soot, the hunger, the unpaid debts. Instead, it became one of the deadliest holiday accidents in history. Over 200 people were killed, hundreds more poisoned, some left crippled for life. And all from a drink that was meant to bring comfort and joy. I mean, talk about false advertising. Drink our Christmas ale, guaranteed to kill the holiday blues, and maybe you too. But let's not forget the sensory details. The smell of that beer still lingered sweet and heavy in the air, even as people lay doubled over in the mud outside taverns. Imagine trudging through snowy streets, the sound of church bells in the distance, but every time you pass another house, someone's screaming inside. The soft flicker of candlelight suddenly looks less cozy when it's shining on a pale, trembling face over a wash basin full of blood and bile. The Christmas goose on the table grows cold because nobody can eat. And the worst part, you've still got half a pint left sitting on the mantel tempting you. You're not even sure if the beer killed your neighbor or if he just had bad luck. Do you risk another sip, or do you swear off alcohol forever? Of course, history gives us the answer. People didn't swear off alcohol, they never do. If anything, the scandal just made them suspicious for a year or two. Then life moved on, and another pint was poured. Because let's face it, if people could survive the Industrial Revolution itself, they weren't going to let a little mass poisoning stop them. But in that December of 1850, Manchester became the world's biggest cautionary tale about knowing what's in your drink. Too bad the caution came after funerals, not before. And here's the part that really messes with your head. Arsenic wasn't even that rare back then. It was in wallpaper dyes, candies, cosmetics, medicine. People literally powdered their faces with poison to look fancy. It was practically the pumpkin spice of the Victorian age. Everywhere, unavoidable, and secretly terrible for you. So maybe this Christmas beer disaster wasn't even a one-off accident. Maybe it was just another day in a century where everything was quietly killing you. Now let me pull you closer to the fire, because we're only scratching the surface of this poisoned Christmas tale. What happens when the panic spreads across the city? How do people react when they realize it wasn't just bad luck, but a conspiracy of negligence and greed? And most importantly, what does it feel like to sip arsenic one more time, knowing it might be your last toast to the holiday season? Stay with me, because the story gets darker, stranger, and more absurd than you think. Morning breaks grey over Manchester, and you wake to the taste of pennies glued to your tongue. The fire has collapsed into sullen orange eyes. Your stomach knits itself into a fist, unclenching only long enough to lurch bile into a chamber pot, already rehearsing tragedy. Outside, horses clop like metronomes for doom. From the alley comes a chorus of wretches' prayers, and someone wishing the bells would stop bragging about Christmas. You try to stand. Your knees refuse. On the table, crusts, a congealed goose, and that half pint staring at you like a dare you lost last night. You shuffle to the door because the door has answers, or at least rumors wearing shoes. The street is a slow river of people doubled over, moving in tides toward the pub that hosted yesterday's cheer. The landlord, red-eyed and righteous, swears on his mother's grave that the barrels were fine. A constable speaks with nervous authority, as if authority alone could absorb vomit. Someone mutters about bad air, another about witches, another about God auditing ledgers. Then a doctor arrives smelling of camphor and effort, sleeves rolled, insisting everyone breathe, sip water, and please stop licking their lips. Now, he looks at you the way a blacksmith looks at iron gone wrong. Tongue pale, gums bleeding, skin clammy and spangled with a rash like crushed holly. He asks what you drank. You say Christmas ale, obviously, with the same innocence as saying you inhaled air. He nods like a man counting coffins. In the doorway, your neighbor Mary clutches her stomach and whispers that her husband can't see. Another woman swears her hair came out like tangled tinsel. The doctor doesn't flinch. He's already seen too much. He asks for the barrel, the sugar, the ledger, the names, all. Word travels faster than ambulances. Soon the mill shuts its gates because hands can't spin thread when they're shaking like leaves. Priests make rounds with psalms that sound suspiciously like apologies. At the chemist's shop, bottles glare through glass as if offended by suspicion. You follow the doctor inside. He demands tests, which in this century means color changes, smells, and a dash of bravado. He drips reagents into a saucer of beer, watching for the telltale yellow bloom. When it flowers like wicked saffron, the room tilts. Arsenic, he says softly, as though speaking the name invites it closer. People ask why a brewer would murder his customers, and the answer hits with the weight of a ledger. No one meant to. The sugar used to prime the Christmas batches came tainted, kissed by acid made from cheap arsenical ore. Profit gilded every step, until the gold flaked off and poisoned everybody holding the cup. You can practically see the supply chain like a parade of ghosts. Refinery, warehouse, cart, brewhouse, tap, throat. Each link gleaming until it breaks. The doctor scribbles, curses, organizes samples, and mutters that negligence wears a festive hat when it wants applause. From anyone. The city responds with theatre. Constables haul barrels into the street and smash them like villains in a morality play. Foam snaking along gutters, sparkling cheerfully as if unaware of the headlines it deserves. People cheer, then gag at the smell. Someone tries to light the river of beer, which is not how chemistry works, but panic doesn't check textbooks. Posters go up. Avoid suspect ale, drink water, tea, or spirits you trust with your will. Mothers boil everything twice. Fathers swear off pubs and then find themselves there by dusk anyway, staring at empty taps like confessional windows. Tonight, your body becomes a laboratory you didn't consent to. Numb fingers, burning throat, the peculiar sweetness at the back of your mouth that insists it is fine while your gut screams liar. You try bread and milk because the widow next door swears it mops poison like a sponge. You try charcoal because a pamphlet says black swallows black. You try prayer because everything else leaks. Hours stretch rubber thin, then snap. You remember laughter from last night. The pub chorus promising wages forgotten by morning. You remember clinking mugs. You remember swallowing winter and feeling it swallow back. So hard. Officials schedule an inquest, which is just a meeting where fear brings snacks. In a cold hall stinking of damp wool, men argue about responsibility using voices polished by respectability. The brewer points at the sugar merchant. The merchant points at the acid maker. The acid maker points at geology, which cannot attend. You listen as terms like duty, purity, and assay parade around, while Mary coughs into a handkerchief that looks like snowfall every time she opens it. When the verdict circles back to nobody in particular, the room exhales disappointment and draws breath for rage. A restrained riot. Night finds you again, and the city moves like a bruised animal licking its wounds, flinching at every clink. The doctor stops by with a parcel. Powders, instructions, a stern look that suggests survival requires obedience you never practiced. He speaks low about cumulative doses, about how the body keeps score, about how even beauty hides knives sometimes. He collects more samples, labels them with neat grim letters, and says a magistrate wants proof strong enough to shame Parliament into remembering humans exist. You ask whether you will live. He answers with a silence that tastes metallic, like cheap cutlery. Then comes the whisper nobody wants to test. Some households escaped. Same street, same goose, same carols, different fate. What changed? Water source, glass glaze, coincident mercy? The doctor lines survivors on one bench, sufferers on another, and chases patterns like a hound on frost. You remember the sweetness in the ale and picture pale crystals poured like snow into copper vats. If the sugar is the serpent, who charmed it? A name, a warehouse, a date begin assembling in your mind like a trap resetting. You tie your scarf, open the door, and follow the smell into ruined merriment. By the third day, Manchester feels like it's balancing on a knife, half city, half morgue. The snow has turned grey from cold soot, peppered with vomit stains, and the occasional broken mug abandoned mid-celebration. Funerals parade down the same alleys where carolers sang just nights ago, and you can't tell if the bells are ringing for worship or for the next coffin. Children who should be unwrapping oranges sit pale on hearth rugs, too weak to stand, while their parents whisper about arsenic like it's a demon that slipped into town wearing a brewer's apron. Even the rats look nervous. When rats look nervous, you know things are bad. You decide to see the warehouse where the sugar was bought because apparently your brain thinks detective work is a great hobby while your stomach is still turning cartwheels of pain. The warehouse stands squat and damp, smelling of molasses and iron filings. Inside, sacks of sugar lean like drunkards against each other. You plunge your hand into one bag and immediately regret it. The crystals are sticky, oddly colored, with a faint metallic tang that coats your tongue just from smell. A clerk nearby insists it's perfectly fine sugar, imported cheap to keep costs down. Cheap being the only thing people trust in 1850, right up until it kills them. The doctor arrives with his kit, his eyes wide as saucers, muttering about sulfuric acid contamination, about the refining process gone wrong. He explains it as though any of you have chemistry degrees instead of scars from spinning cotton 12 hours a day. Still, the word arsenic hangs in the rafters heavier than smoke. He sketches the process on a scrap of paper. Sugar bleached with contaminated acid, crystals laced with death, bundled into sacks and sold without question. The clerk sweats like butter near a flame. You half expect him to faint into the poison pile, saving the city the trouble of a trial. Rumors grow arms and legs. Some say rival brewers sabotaged the batch, jealous of Christmas profits. Others whisper the government knew and let it happen to thin out the poor. A few claim it was divine punishment for drunkenness. After all, Jesus turned water into wine, not arsenic-laced beer. Meanwhile, households try folk remedies like boiling pennies in milk or chewing soot. One desperate man swears that downing raw gin kills the killer. He dies by morning, proving at least that gin is committed to its role as a false friend. You can't decide whether to laugh or puke, so you do both. The courts convene faster this time because the bodies piling up demand paperwork. Witnesses file in, wrapped in scarves that don't hide their jaundiced skin. The brewer sobs into his handkerchief, insisting he never meant harm. The sugar refiner writes letters begging for mercy, claiming ignorance. Ignorance, it seems, is contagious. Everyone catches it once they're accused. Meanwhile, the doctor displays his yellow test results in little glass vials, each glowing like miniature suns of doom. The magistrate stares at them as though hoping one might miraculously read, "Not guilty." Spoiler, None of them do. But trials are long. Suffering is immediate. Back at home, your neighbor Mary has taken a turn for the worse. Her lips are cracked, her breath shallow, her skin a patchwork of red and white. She asks you to sing her a hymn, but your throat is raw and your voice trembles like it wants to desert you. Still, you hum something low, something that might have been Silent Night if it weren't shredded by coughs. She closes her eyes as though pretending it's beautiful anyway. For a moment, the room smells only of candle wax and wood smoke, not bile and death. That moment dissolves quickly. Food becomes terrifying. Every mouthful feels like Russian roulette. Bread? What if the flour mill cut corners? Meat? What if the butcher sharpened knives with poison grease? Even water tastes suspicious. Families cling to tea as though boiling leaves were the only holy ritual left. You sip it until your teeth rattle, pretending the bitter comfort is armor. Outside, vendors shout about pure supplies guaranteed safe. The first time in history marketing had to promise basic survival. Children beg for sweets, but parents clutch them close, hissing, "No, not this Christmas. Not after what sugar has done." And still, life stumbles on. Factories reopen because misery doesn't excuse missed quotas. Men with trembling hands return to spinning frames. Women cough into kerchiefs while stitching. The mill owners issue statements about regrettable circumstances and pray production numbers erase grief. But Manchester carries the weight like lead in its bloodstream. Every tavern is a ghost, every mug a murder weapon in disguise. You find yourself dreaming of water, clean and endless, the kind you've never actually tasted. You wake up gasping, your mouth dry as dust, reaching for a cup you don't trust. Sleep offers no mercy here. By week's end, the newspapers finally pick up the story in full. Bold letters shout, "Arsenic in the ale." Columns detail symptoms, funerals, angry citizens. Some papers turn it into satire, drawing cartoons of skeletons, clinking mugs in taverns, because Victorians never missed a chance for dark humor. Others demand reform, stricter inspections, and chemical standards. It feels almost laughable that it took a Christmas massacre to convince people maybe, just maybe, arsenic isn't a suitable seasoning. But the headlines spread beyond Manchester, and soon the whole country is whispering about poison in their pints. Fear travels faster than carols, and you're still alive somehow, still coughing, still weak, but alive. The doctor calls you fortunate. You don't feel fortunate, sitting in a city where funerals outnumber feasts. You wonder whether the arsenic still lingers inside you, hidden in marrow, waiting for next Christmas to finish what it started. You wonder if beer will ever taste like beer again, or if every sip will carry the ghost of that bitter, metallic tang. You wonder if Christmas will ever sound like laughter again, instead of retching echoing through frosted windows. The snow falls, muffling the noise, but not enough. Never enough. Weeks drag past Christmas, like lead boots through snow. The carols have stopped. The geese are bones. Every surviving family wears grief the way coal dust wears your lungs, impossible to scrub off. You shuffle along Market Street, where once candles twinkled in shop windows, but now every pane reflects pale, hungry faces, wary of anything labelled festive. A banner advertising Christmas ale still hangs limp above a shuttered tavern. Nobody tears it down, nobody needs the reminder. The wind flaps it like a cruel joke, as though the town itself is snickering at its own people. You tighten your scarf and keep walking. The funerals have become routine. Black horses dragging black carriages, wheels crunching on salt and cinder. Children watch from corners, too young to know what arsenic is, old enough to know it stole their fathers. The church bells ring so often they've lost meaning, background noise like a hammer in the mills. The minister's voice cracks under repetition, each eulogy blending into the last. Hard-working, loved, gone too soon. You stop attending after the fifth one, not out of disrespect, out of survival. You can't keep watching boxes go into the ground without feeling your stomach clench as if you're next. And then the inquiries begin again, this time louder. Newspapers won't let the story die. They print sketches of brewers stirring vats with skulls floating in the foam. They describe arsenic like it's a monster lurking in the shadows of every sugar sack. Some journalists rail against greed. The price of cheapness is blood. Others rail against science. Chemistry meddles with God's pantry. One particularly vicious editorial suggests Manchester deserves it for being too fond of drink. That last one nearly gets the printing press smashed by an angry mob because grief can sit quietly for only so long before it wants teeth. The doctor keeps notes. You visit him one evening, too curious, or maybe too restless to stay home. His study smells of ink, damp wool, and the sour tang of preserved samples. Rows of bottles glimmer on shelves, each with handwritten labels. Sample from barrel Sound 17, Sugar Bag C, Alehouse X. He explains that arsenic is invisible until you force it to confess through tests. He shows you a strip of copper darkened by fumes, the way poison leaves fingerprints, if you know how to ask. He mutters about needing regulations, inspectors, chemical standards, words that feel modern, almost futuristic, like dreaming of machines that fly. But the magistrates are slower. They prefer committees, hearings, and polite arguments over teacups. You attend one out of morbid curiosity. Men in wigs debate whether regulation might discourage honest trade. Someone actually argues that stricter rules would make sugar unaffordable to the common man. You want to scream that the common man is already in the ground, but your voice is weak and your courage weaker. The doctor presents his findings anyway, and though some scoff, others listen. You see it in their eyes, the slow turning of gears, the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, arsenic shouldn't be the secret ingredient in Christmas cheer. Meanwhile, everyday survival becomes a gamble. Families refuse to touch sugar. Tea goes unsweetened. Biscuits taste like bricks. Puddings are abandoned. Children sulk at the loss of treats, but their parents glare as if sweets themselves are traitors. Grocers advertise tested sugar, though nobody knows how true that is. Some clever baker prints arsenic-free on his shop sign, and suddenly his queues stretch around the block. Fear has become currency. Even water feels safer than a sugared bun, and in Manchester, that's saying something. You sip your bitter tea and pretend it's bravery. The taverns are the worst. Once rowdy havens of laughter, now hollow shells echoing with suspicion. Barrels sit untouched in corners. Mugs gather dust. The barkeep polishes glass after glass just to keep from going mad, swearing he'll never buy cheap sugar again, swearing it was never his fault anyway. Customers come in only to ask questions, never to drink. Where did your sugar come from? Who brewed this batch? Have you tested it? And when the barkeep swears on his mother's grave, they nod politely, leave a coin on the counter, and walk out without touching a drop. Ale has become arsenic in disguise. And your body still isn't right. The cramps come and go. Some nights you wake drenched in sweat, convinced you smell metal in your own breath. Your hair sheds in the comb. Your fingertips tingle like frostbite, even when the fire roars. The doctor shrugs helplessly. Arsenic lingers, he says, and its damage is patient. You wonder how many survivors are only surviving for now. How many will collapse months later, still paying the bill for a pint they never should have swallowed. Christmas gave gifts that keep on giving, long after the carols stopped. Spring creeps in, reluctant. The snow melts into black rivers that carry away the last of winter's filth. Flowers push through graveyard soil, too stubborn to know better. Factories roar louder again, drowning out the memory of bells tolling for funerals. People try to pretend it's over, that life is normal, that sugar can sweeten without suspicion. But every time someone stirs tea, you see their hands shake. Every time someone raises a glass, you hear the faint hiss of poison. Maybe the city will forget in time, or maybe it will carry the ghost of this poisoned Christmas forever, a shadow in every toast. And here's the bitter punchline. Manchester's disaster didn't just kill its own, it rewrote rules. Slowly, painfully, regulators began inspecting food. Chemists invented better tests. Laws passed demanding purity, demanding safety, demanding that no one ever die because a holiday pint doubled as rat poison. Out of your suffering, something resembling progress crept forward. It doesn't bring back Mary. It doesn't soothe the children who buried their parents. But it builds a fence so maybe the next generation won't fall in the same pit. Too bad that's the only gift this Christmas managed to deliver. A warning stamped in gravestones. Still, when December rolls around again, people can't help themselves. Taverns fill cautiously, mugs raised carefully, toasts spoken in lower voices. Fear fades like fog when ale foams, and humans are creatures of habit as much as hope. You sit in the corner, hands wrapped around a cup of water, watching, listening. Laughter bubbles again, though thinner, edged with memory. Someone sings a carol a little off-key. For a second, the world almost feels right. Almost. Then you catch a whiff of sweetness on the air, sugar, innocent or not, and your stomach lurches. The ghost of arsenic is still at the table, always. Summer in Manchester doesn't feel like summer. It feels like the city forgot what warmth was supposed to mean. The factories cough out smoke so thick you'd think clouds had squatted on the rooftops and refused to leave. Kids splash in gutters pretending it's fun, but even they know the water glitters suspiciously, like someone mixed diamonds with disease. People are still whispering about Christmas. Not carols, not joy. Arsenic. The word clings to conversations like soot clings to skin. Everyone knows someone who didn't make it. Everyone carries the invisible scar, distrust, of sugar, of brewers, of life itself. You walk past a bakery one bright afternoon, the windows stacked with loaves, crusts cracked golden. A sign reads in bold, chalked letters, "Tested, safe." Mothers peek in, torn between hunger and suspicion. A child tugs at her sleeve, desperate for sweets. She finally steps inside, her shoulders trembling as if the doorway were the edge of a cliff. You stand outside, listening, waiting. The first bite her boy takes echoes like a gunshot in your skull. Will he gag? Will he collapse? No. He chews, swallows, grins. Relief floods the bakery like sunlight. And still, you can't make yourself step inside. Not yet. Meanwhile, the courts grind on. The sugar refiner faces his inquest, and the gallery packs tight with mill workers, widows, and angry sons. The air smells of sweat, ink, and resentment. The prosecutor hammers the point. The man sold death in sacks, disguised as sweetness. The defense counters. Ignorance, bad luck, an accident. You sit in the back, clenching your jaw until your teeth ache. Accident doesn't cover 200 bodies in the ground. Accident doesn't explain why profit was worth more than purity. The jury deliberates for hours, and when the verdict lands, manslaughter, the crowd erupts. Some cry justice, others cry cowardice. Both are right, but punishment doesn't resurrect. The widows go home to empty chairs, the children to hungry nights. Compensation is a rumor, never reality. The brewer loses his trade, the refiner his reputation, but neither shares the graves. You wander through the cemetery one evening, reading names etched in cold stone, and realize most of them are younger than you. 23, 30, 40. Ages that should have been beginnings, not endings. The grass is dotted with wilted wreaths, the air heavy with silence. You kneel by Mary's grave and feel the weight of survival pressing down like lead. Why you? Why not her? No answer comes. Yet amidst the mourning something stirs. Chemists across the country seize the moment, using Manchester's tragedy as their rallying cry. They publish papers, propose methods, demand laws. Public health becomes a phrase whispered in Parliament. Inspectors are hired to sniff out poison before it reaches mugs. For the first time, the state peers into kitchens and breweries, declaring that food should not be roulette. It feels radical, almost absurd. Why did it take so long, and yet it's happening? Your city's misery is becoming blueprint. Manchester unwillingly has birthed reform. It doesn't heal, but it matters. History sharpens itself on blood. Not that daily life gets easier. Work remains brutal, factories deafening, streets thick with beggars. But at least beer returns to tables. Slowly, cautiously, mugs are lifted again. Taverns reopen with signs boasting, "Certified safe." Men cheer half-heartedly. Women either foam like it's plotting. You sip water, always water, but you watch. And one night, a young man you don't know raises his pint and declares, "To the ones we lost." The crowd murmurs, clinks glasses, drinks. The silence after is heavy, but it isn't grief, it's remembrance. For once ale doesn't just drown sorrow, it honors it. You almost believe that's progress. Still, the scars show in strange ways. Children draw skeletons in chalk instead of angels. Housewives sniff sugar before using it, sometimes dumping it in the fire just to be safe. Old men mutter about arsenic whenever their stomachs turn. The poisoned Christmas has become folklore already, a cautionary tale told at bedtime, equal parts warning and ghost story. Behave or you'll end up like the poor souls who drank the bad beer. Kids laugh nervously, but you see the fear in their eyes. The story has teeth, and it will bite down for generations. One evening you find yourself in a tavern, not for drink but for company. The fire roars, the air hums with cautious laughter. A fiddler saws out a tune, sharp and ragged, but it carries. A man offers you a pint, foam spilling down the sides. You hesitate, your hand trembling. He grins. Safe, I swear it. The room watches, curious. You bring the mug to your lips, breathe in the malty sweetness, and stop. The ghost of arsenic breathes back, metallic, sharp, unforgettable. You set it down untouched. Laughter resumes without you. You sit in the corner, sipping water, listening, always listening. The poisoned Christmas doesn't vanish. It lingers in every sugar crystal, every pint, every carol that dares to sound too cheerful. Manchester moves on because it must, but you know, deep in your bones, deep in the marrow, still humming with traces of arsenic, that the city is branded forever. And you? You carry the memory like a second heartbeat. The night of toasts turned to funerals, the ale that promised joy and delivered graves. The Christmas where everyone drank poison and survival tasted almost as bitter as the death it escaped. Autumn leans in early, and Manchester pretends it doesn't notice. You notice everything. The smell of wet coal, the way shop windows fog then clear like lungs struggling, the timid laughter that dies when mugs appear. You've started keeping a notebook, ghost-trapping memories before they fade into smog. Each page crackles with names, places, symptoms, rumors. You aren't a journalist or a doctor. You're a survivor who refuses to forget. When sleep comes, it drags you backward into candlelight and metallic sweetness. When day returns, people ask if the city is healed. You shrug, wounds knit, scars argue louder. Always. Your notebook begins with Mary because the dead deserve first billing. You describe her scarf, the frayed red threads, the way her voice softened when she lied that she felt better. You describe the doctor pinching the bridge of his nose, as if pain could be squeezed smaller. You record the warehouse stink, sugar weeping rust-flavored tears. You sketch a map of taverns like constellations that all led to one poisoned star. Underneath you write a selfish sentence, I lived. The ink spreads like guilt. You blow it dry and promise the page that living means witnessing, relentlessly, without mercy. Newsboys hawk pamphlets shouting salvation by chemistry. You buy every sheet, then circle claims with a stub of pencil like a schoolmaster grading hope. Tests, assays, copper strips, green stains, procedures you can barely pronounce. At night, you try them at your table, transforming your kitchen into a stage where liquids confess. Neighbors drift in, curious and cautious, watching colors bloom like bruises. Someone whispers that you've become the arsenic oracle. You hate the joke, but you share your notes anyway. Knowledge feels like warm tea, bitter first, then steadying. You keep pouring, afraid silence will poison faster than fear. One afternoon, a brewer knocks, hat crushed in both hands. He looks like a battlefield wearing boots. He asks for forgiveness you don't own, then asks for help you cannot refuse. His new batches sit untouched. Rumors cling like smoke. You follow him to the brewhouse where copper kettles shine like guilty suns. He shows receipts, swears purity, begs you to test the sugar stacked like snowdrifts. You run your ritual, dissolve, heat, watch, wait. No saffron bloom, no lethal whisper. Safe. He exhales a prayer without saints. Still, you advise warnings on the door. Trust returns slower than winter. The magistrate sends a letter, stamped official blue, summoning your notebook with alarming courtesy. You carry it like a living thing. In the chamber, men perform seriousness, rehearsed nods and knitted brows. They ask whether public fear is justified. You answer yes and list the funerals alphabetically until the room loses its appetite. They ask whether reforms are feasible. You answer yes, if they like breathing. A clerk copies your methods, smudging ink with hurried hands. When you leave, the corridor smells of damp wool and timid resolve. Outside, a woman presses your sleeve and whispers, "Thank you, stranger, tonight." Not everyone welcomes the crusade. A pamphleteer caricatures you as a ghoul profiting from panic, a skeleton stirring teacups with a spectre's grin. Children think it's funny, grown men laugh sharp as flint. You laugh too, then feel the laugh cut. That night, someone chalks poison priest on your door. You wipe it clean with a wet rag that smells of ash. The brewer sends bread as apology for the city's teeth. You break a piece, taste plain salvation, and write another page. Ridicule is a cousin of guilt. Across the street, a choir practices. Flat, earnest, indestructible despite everything. You endure. Winter returns like a debt collector. Frost freckles the windows, and carols crawl cautiously back into parlours, humble and hoarse. On Christmas Eve, you light a candle for Mary and all the others, then open the door to the night so their names can hear they're remembered. A neighbour knocks, holding a small tin. Biscuits baked with sugar she tested twice. You accept one, weigh it, smell it, break it. Crumbs tumble like dry snow. You place half on your tongue and wait for ghosts. Nothing rises. Only butter, only cinnamon. You swallow, then laugh until your ribs loosen finally. Later the tavern fills, not raucous, not dead, something braver, ordinary. The brewer spots you, lifts a glass of water in your direction, and the room follows, a toast to caution. You raise yours, and the hush tastes like mercy. Someone starts a story about the worst Christmas Manchester ever suffered, and for once the story doesn't end at the grave. It ends with laws, with labels, with people who insisted on better. You walk home under a sky scraped clean by frost, pockets empty, notebook heavy, heart steadier. Survival isn't glamorous. It's stubborn. It keeps walking, even limping home. In bed, you practice breathing like forgiveness. Slow, imperfect, honest. The ceiling listens without judgment. Your notebook lies open on the chair, pages fluttering whenever the draft creeps under the door like a nosy aunt. You consider writing an ending, then leave the last line blank. Stories like this don't finish. They fade into habits, laws, recipes, warnings murmured over kettles. Your eyelids grow heavy. You think of Mary laughing once at something small, and the laugh lifts you towards sleep like a lantern on a black canal. If dreams come, let them bring water, clean and endless for you. Morning returns with thin light and thin bread. You eat, dress, open the door, and the street greets you with carts, boots, gossip, steam, the orchestra of survival tuning up again. You step into it, not heroic, just present. A child dashes past swinging a toy horse. The mother mouths sorry. You wave, surprised by gentleness. Somewhere a bell rings, and for the first time it doesn't sound like a warning. It sounds like an invitation to keep going. So you do. You go to the tavern, the market, the magistrate, the morning. You go on living, loudly this time. By the second anniversary, Manchester has turned the poisoned Christmas into both a wound and a brand. Street hawkers sell pamphlets with lurid titles. The ale that slew a city, a pint from hell, as if death were entertainment on cheap paper. Preachers thunder about divine justice, while brewers hang banners shouting "certified pure" in letters so large they could be seen from across the smog. Nobody trusts banners, but everyone reads them anyway. You wander through the crowd, listening. Half the city wants to forget. The other half can't stop retelling the story, polishing it sharper with each retelling until truth gleams like a knife. Your notebook has swollen into 2 volumes now, bound in leather scuffed by travel and handling. Strangers knock on your door to borrow it like a prayer book. Widows weep over its pages. Survivors nod grimly. Journalists scavenge details. You let them, though every loan feels like handing over your ribs. One evening you find a child asleep on your doorstep, clutching the book like a teddy bear. His father died that night in the pub. You lift him gently, cover him with your coat, and whisper that the poison won't come back. You don't know if he hears. You don't know if you believe it. The chemists grow bolder. They form societies with names longer than your patience. Associations for analytical assurance, committees for public safety, men in stiff collars who test everything from sweets to wallpaper. The first national standards are drafted, a thin fence around an enormous pasture. Newspapers hail Manchester as the city that taught the nation vigilance. You scoff, because vigilance is a fine word until you see Mary's grave. Still, you copy the articles into your notebook. Bitter or not, progress is progress, and ghosts deserve receipts showing the world tried to do better eventually. But progress doesn't fill bellies. Wages still starve. The mills roar louder than any sermon. You work because work is survival, even if it grinds your bones into flour. At the looms, men whisper arsenic jokes when foremen aren't listening. One coughs, clutches his chest, and someone quips, "Better not be the beer again." Nervous laughter follows, then silence. The joke never lands clean. It's too true. At lunch, women pull out bread and apples, plain fare, and you notice how few carry sweets anymore. Sugar is still stained, a guilty pleasure rationed like contraband. One Christmas killed a century's appetite in a season. You attend another funeral. This one not arsenic, just ordinary pneumonia. Still, the minister mentions Our Poisoned Christmas, as if it's the city's surname now. Every death, no matter the cause, gets tied to that December like a shadow. You wonder if Manchester will ever earn a new reputation. Maybe not. Maybe history already stamped the city's forehead with arsenic, and nothing short of centuries will scrub it clean. On your way home, a stranger stops you and asks, "Were you there?" You nod. He looks at you like a relic, half holy, half cursed. You walk faster, heart pounding with the weight of survival's spotlight. The tavern changes too. Once a place of suspicion, now it leans into its notoriety. The brewer, older, thinner but stubborn, brands his ale the Resurrection Brew. Guaranteed to kill your thirst, not you, the chalkboard reads. Customers laugh nervously, then drink. The humor is gallows, but it works. You sip water as always, but watch as mugs clink again without hesitation. The laughter rises higher than the rafters, and for the first time, it doesn't falter. Maybe the city has decided the best revenge against poison is indulgence. Maybe survival tastes better when toasted. Maybe both. But at night, ghosts still walk. You dream of Mary's scarf again, the frayed red threads, the way her hand gripped yours in those last hours. You dream of barrels splitting open, foam pouring into gutters, rats drinking cheerfully before keeling over. You dream of children chewing sugar crystals that sparkle like frost. You wake gagging, the metallic taste burning your tongue though you haven't touched ale in years. Some nights you write until dawn, filling pages just to drain the poison memory. The notebook grows fatter. Your heart does not grow lighter. Writing is only bleeding in neat lines. When Parliament finally passes the Adulteration of Food Act, the newspapers erupt in triumph. You read every column twice, tracing each phrase with your fingertip. At last the law admits what Manchester already knew: unchecked profit poisons. It's a milestone, yes, but the law arrives like a late guest at a funeral, necessary yet insulting. You copy it into your notebook anyway, because someday children will ask, and you'll point to the page and say, "See? Your Christmas sweets are safe because ours weren't." Maybe then the ghosts will feel less like punishment, more like guardians. Maybe, if ghosts forgive at all. The city softens over years, though the scar never leaves. Sugar returns to puddings, beer to mugs, laughter to streets. People speak of the poisoned Christmas less often, though when they do, voices drop, as if speaking near a grave. You grow older, your hair thinning, your hand cramping when you write. Still you add to the notebook, stubborn as ever. One winter morning, you catch your reflection in a frosted window and realize you've become the keeper of Manchester's darkest Christmas. A role you never wanted, but one you wear anyway. Because forgetting is worse than arsenic. Forgetting kills twice. So you tell the story again. To children, to strangers, to anyone who asks why you drink water in a tavern. You tell it until your throat aches, until your lungs burn, until the memory feels sharper than the present. And each time you finish, you close with the same line, whispered like a prayer and a warning: beware the sweetness that kills. Then you smile crookedly, as if it were only a bedtime story. But inside, you still taste that pint, still hear Mary's last laugh, still feel Manchester convulsing under the weight of poisoned joy. Some stories never settle. They sting forever. By the time 2 decades pass, the poisoned Christmas has grown long, crooked legs, and started walking on its own. Children born after the tragedy whisper about it at night, the way earlier generations whispered about ghosts. Only their ghost has a date: December 1850. Don't drink the devil's ale, they tease each other, then shriek with laughter, but always with eyes darting toward the nearest mug. In schools, teachers invoke it like cautionary scripture. Study your numbers, or you'll end up like those poor fools who drank arsenic. Even playground games borrow the story. One child is the brewer, another the refiner. Everyone else drops dead in the mud. Childhood, apparently, has sharp teeth. For you, the story never left. Your notebook now spans 5 volumes, the leather cracked, pages smudged with fingerprints of strangers who begged to read them. Sometimes you wonder if you've become more archivist than survivor, a caretaker of sorrow too stubborn to die. One evening, your neighbor's granddaughter sits at your knee and asks, "Is it true you saw the poisoned beer?" Her eyes are wide, her voice trembling between fear and awe. You nod, and she gasps as though you admitted shaking hands with death itself. You tell her the story softly, trimming the edges, hiding the vomit and rashes. But when she leaves, You write the full truth again, because someone must. The city has shifted. Manchester is bigger, louder, dirtier, richer. Factories sprout like weeds, and the skyline bruises with smokestacks. But even amidst growth, taverns keep their cautious slogans. Pure ale, certified, no poison here. They've become less about reassurance and more about branding. A macabre joke turned tradition. People laugh now when they see them, but the laughter is thin, the kind that knows history never really leaves. One brewer bottles a special edition at Christmas time called the Arsenic Angel. It sells out instantly, because nothing attracts customers like flirting with catastrophe. People drink it for the thrill, as though daring ghosts to pull up a chair. The newspapers have shifted too. They no longer scream headlines about arsenic. Now they reminisce. The year Manchester nearly drank itself to death. The ale that changed the law. Articles appear every December, recycling the story like a seasonal ornament. Cartoonists sketch skeletons in Santa hats raising pints. Some people roll their eyes, tired of the retelling. Others lean closer, hungry to keep the fear alive. For the first time, you realize the story has stopped belonging to you. It belongs to everyone now, molded and twisted into legend. Truth fades. The poisoned Christmas has become entertainment, morality play, cautionary carol, and yet your body won't let you forget the real cost. Your joints ache worse with each winter, a reminder of the arsenic that never fully left your bones. The doctor, older now, though still stubborn, calls it residual effects. You call it memory etched into marrow. Nights grow harder, sleep slips further. You wake coughing metallic ghosts, convinced you smell sugar burning in the air. Some mornings you wonder if your survival wasn't mercy, but punishment, to remember long after the graves have sunk into quiet grass. You close your notebook, but the story keeps scratching at your insides like claws on wood. The government parades its progress. Inspectors in crisp coats visit factories demanding samples, running tests, stamping approvals. Public health has become an institution, born from Manchester's misery. People trust their bread again, their sugar, their ale. Children grow up without the automatic suspicion you carry in your gut. They drink sweet tea at Christmas without hesitation. And that's the cruel paradox. You lived through poison so they wouldn't have to, but now they don't understand why your hands tremble when you see frosted biscuits. History moves forward, dragging survivors behind like anchors. You want to be glad. You also want to scream. By the third decade, storytellers begin embellishing. Some claim entire families collapsed instantly after a single sip. Others insist angels appeared in the taverns to carry away the dying. A few insist the beer glowed green. You try correcting people at first, but eventually stop. Legends don't want accuracy, they want claws. And so you listen in taverns as men sing bawdy songs about the pint of doom, laughter spilling louder with each verse. It stings, but then you see something strange. Even mockery keeps memory alive. Even ridicule refuses forgetting. You sip your water and let the laughter carry the ghosts for a while. Christmas returns every year, whether you invite it or not. Candles, puddings, carols. You light one candle for Mary, another for the others. A ritual you never skip. Neighbors roll their eyes. That old man and his candles. But you don't care. Flame is the only language the dead still understand. Some nights, children sneak up to your window to watch the candles flicker, whispering that you're casting spells. Maybe you are. Spells to hold memory. Spells to keep sweetness honest. Spells to remind the city that joy must always be tested, because sometimes it hides arsenic teeth. And here's the strangest part. The poisoned Christmas has started feeling less like tragedy, more like inheritance. People toast to it now, laugh about it, use it as shorthand for disaster narrowly avoided. Could be worse, they say. Could be another poisoned Christmas. The phrase has become Manchester's twisted badge of honor. It doesn't erase the bodies, but it shapes the city's soul. Gritty, darkly humorous, stubborn. Survival wrapped in soot and sarcasm. You wonder if maybe that's what it means to heal. Not to forget, not to forgive, but to wear the scar proudly and dare the world to look away. Still, in your heart, the memory isn't a badge. It's a night you can't scrub clean, a taste that never leaves your tongue, a friend buried too soon. You'll carry it until your own grave swallows you, and when that day comes, you hope someone else keeps a candle lit. Because if history has one lesson, it's this: beware the sweetness that kills. And never ever trust a pint that promises joy too cheaply. By the time 40 years have passed, Manchester's poisoned Christmas has slipped from fresh wound to inherited scar. The city has grown fat with factories, rails and money, but underneath the smoke and bustle the memory lurks like a mouse in the walls. People no longer speak of arsenic with panic in their throats. They speak with smirks, or with that knowing shake of the head reserved for family scandals everyone pretends to laugh about. Children who never tasted the tainted beer chant playground rhymes. 1 sip, 2 sip, down you go, arsenic's hiding, don't you know? They chant it with the same glee their parents once saved for skipping songs. History becomes hopscotch. Your notebook now spans an entire shelf, thick spines leaning against each other like veterans. Pages are yellowed, edges curled, ink faded in places where tears fell decades ago. Younger folk call you the chronicler, half respectful, half mocking, as if you're some relic preserved only to repeat yourself. You oblige. You tell the story again and again, in taverns, in classrooms, at firesides. Sometimes you trim the gore for children, sometimes you sharpen it for rowdy drinkers, but always you keep the bones true. You've become Manchester's unwanted Santa Claus. Instead of toys, you deliver the tale of how Christmas once killed joy. The taverns have leaned into legend. One pub renames itself the Poisoned Pint, its signboard painted with a grinning skull, raising a frothy mug. Tourists, yes, tourists now, come just to drink there, laughing nervously as they order arsenic ale that's nothing but ordinary bitter with a clever label. You sit in the corner sipping water, watching history become novelty. Every laugh is a knife twist, yet you don't stop them. Laughter is still better than silence, and at least the dead are remembered, even if remembered wrongly. Still, when the fiddler strikes up a jaunty tune about the ale that ate the town, you close your eyes and wish you were deaf. Legends mutate like gossip on fire. Some say the arsenic beer made men glow in the dark before they died. Others insist angels poured the mugs, punishing sinners. A traveling storyteller from London spins the tale as if a demon himself brewed the batch. You try to correct him once, explaining about contaminated sugar, chemistry, negligence. He winks at you and says, "That version doesn't sell, old man." And he's right. Crowds want devils, not supply chains. They want miracles and monsters, not dull negligence. You grind your teeth, but you let him talk. Legends aren't history, they're theater. You keep history on your shelf even if nobody reads. Meanwhile, the city grows harder, louder. Coal dust grinds into lungs. Cholera visits every few years like an uninvited aunt. Children still starve in alleys. Compared to all that, arsenic beer feels almost quaint. People joke, better poisoned ale than another wage cut. Black humour becomes Manchester's true dialect. Yet every December the anniversary stirs unease. Candles flicker in windows, some for Jesus, some for the poisoned dead. You keep yours burning all night as always. Children press their noses to the glass, whispering that you're calling ghosts. Maybe you are. Maybe ghosts need warmth too. One winter evening, a group of young factory workers invite you to tell the story again. They're rowdy, tired, soot-streaked, mugs in hand. You describe the symptoms: vomit, convulsions, rashes, blindness. Their laughter falters. You describe the funerals, the endless toll of bells. Their mugs lower. You describe Mary, her scarf, her laugh cut short. Silence falls. One boy mutters, "Bloody hell." Another whispers, "Never heard it that way before." You realize then that the story isn't dead. It's just buried beneath jokes and rhymes, waiting for someone stubborn enough to dig it out. You keep digging word by word until their eyes shine. As the century turns, newspapers resurrect the poisoned Christmas for anniversary specials. Illustrations show skeletal Santas, frothy mugs brimming with skulls. Journalists call it Manchester's dark gift to public health. They frame it as a turning point, the disaster that birthed food safety laws. You read the articles, lips pursed, because while they aren't wrong, they aren't right either. They praise progress but skim over pain. They tally laws, not lives. You scrawl angry notes in your margin. Mary not mentioned, the children not mentioned, the survivors forgotten. History loves heroes, villains and tidy morals, but this story was never tidy. Your joints ache too much now to walk far, but word still finds you. Students arrive with notebooks asking for interviews. They sketch your face, your words, your cramped writing hand. What was it like, they ask. You sigh because no matter how often you answer, the truth never fits in sentences. It was Christmas, you finally tell them, and it tasted like death wearing sugar. They scribble, satisfied, as if that line alone captures everything. You know it doesn't, but you're tired. Let them write their versions. Let them carve the legend into textbooks. You'll keep your notebooks close. Yours aren't for sale. As the fire crackles one cold December night, you realize you're the last living witness. Everyone else from that poisoned Christmas lies under stone. The city has moved on, but you haven't, and maybe that's the point. Maybe every story needs a stubborn keeper to hold the edges from fraying into lies. You blow out the candle, whispering names into the dark, and hope the dead hear. Tomorrow you'll light it again, and the day after, until you can't. Until the poisoned Christmas claims you too, not with arsenic, but with time. By the 1890s, the poisoned Christmas has outgrown Manchester. It drifts through England like coal smoke on the wind, mutating as it goes. In parlours lit by gaslight, families tell the tale the way others tell ghost stories. A skeletal brewer lurks in some versions, pouring arsenic with a wink. In others, Death himself walks into a pub on Christmas Eve, buys a round for the house, and leaves laughing. Children huddle under blankets, equal parts terrified and thrilled. Parents nod gravely as if saying, "Behave, or the poisoned ale will come for you." Discipline disguised as folklore. Victorian parenting at its finest. You sit in your chair, older than you ever expected, listening to young visitors repeat the story back to you as though you hadn't lived it. One lad insists the beer turned bright green before killing people. So a girl swears she heard the victims rose at midnight to sing one last carol in harmony. You correct them gently at first. No, it wasn't green. No, there were no midnight choirs. But they smile, nod, and carry on believing their versions anyway. Truth is brittle. Legends bend, flex, survive. You sigh and let it go. What matters, perhaps, is not accuracy, but memory itself. Taverns lean harder into the macabre branding. One renames its Christmas brew St. Arsenic's Reserve. The label shows a skeleton in bishop's robes raising a toast. Customers buy it for the thrill of drinking history in a glass, conveniently forgetting history tasted of vomit and blood. You watch them from the corner, sipping water, as always. A young man laughs too loud, declares, "At least if I die, it'll be legendary." You want to grab his collar and shout, "Legend is no comfort when your gut twists like a noose." Instead, you let him drink. Sometimes memory is wasted on the young. Meanwhile, ghost stories become fashionable. Dickens gave the world A Christmas Carol decades earlier, and now every December demands more phantoms, more warnings cloaked in candlelight. Writers borrow Manchester's tragedy, dressing it up in Gothic clothes. They write of shadowed taverns, mugs glowing like lanterns, victims dancing skeleton jigs before collapsing. Magazines print these tales beside advertisements for plum pudding and patent medicines laced with, yes, the irony bites, arsenic. You clip every story, paste it into your notebook, seething and laughing all at once. The horror sells because it's cozy in print, distant enough to thrill without choking. You, meanwhile, still smell the bile. Christmas parties begin to include arsenic tales as entertainment. Someone dims the lamps, someone else rattles chains, and then the storyteller leans forward, voice low. On Christmas Eve, the people of Manchester raised their mugs. Guests gasp, clutch their cups, and then burst into nervous laughter when the story ends. You imagine Mary sitting in the corner, her face pale, her hand on her stomach, whispering, "It wasn't entertainment, it was agony." But Mary isn't there. Only her memory is, and you hold it like hot iron, too heavy to drop, too painful to keep. At the century's end, newspapers celebrate the 50th anniversary of Manchester's darkest Christmas. Headlines trumpet survival and progress. No more poison in our pints. Photographs show smiling inspectors, gleaming breweries, happy drinkers. They don't show the gravestones. They don't print the names. They prefer triumph over tragedy. You fold the paper, shove it into your notebook, and scrawl a single bitter line. They learned the wrong lesson. They celebrate the law, but forget the lives. History, you realize, doesn't heal wounds. It sells them, wrapped in ribbon, dipped in nostalgia, safe for polite consumption. Still, part of you wonders if this is what healing looks like. Not erasure, but transformation. Pain softened into story. Story reshaped into warning. Warning repackaged as entertainment. Maybe that's the only way humans survive, by laughing at what once killed them. You sit by the fire, notebook on your lap, candle flickering, and whisper the story again. Not for tourists, not for newspapers, not for thrill seekers. For Mary, for the hundreds whose laughter turned to retching that night. For yourself. The fire listens, the flame crackles, and the ghosts gather quietly around your chair. And so, Manchester's poisoned Christmas becomes less a tragedy, more a carol. Not one sung in churches, but in back rooms and parlours, in whispers and rhymes. A carol of arsenic and ale, of negligence and grief. A song that warns, sweetness can kill, joy must be questioned, and every toast should remember the cost of the last. Whether sung in jest or in sorrow, the carol survives, and as you close your eyes, older now than you ever dreamed possible, you realize, maybe survival isn't about forgetting pain. Maybe it's about teaching others to sing it safely. By the turn of the century, Manchester has grown too fast for its bones. Electric lamps flicker where candles once struggled. Streetcars rattle where horses clopped. Smoke still smothers the sky, but now it smells less of coal and more of ambition. And yet, beneath the buzz of progress, the poisoned Christmas lingers, stitched into the fabric of the city like a dark thread no loom can unpick. Most who speak of it never knew a victim. They know only the tale, polished smooth by repetition. The year the ale turned to arsenic. History has lost its stench, but not its shadow. You, however, have not forgotten the stench. It clings to you, even after half a lifetime. Your notebook towers now, 10 thick volumes, ink faded, spines cracked. Sometimes you sit by the fire, running your hands along them like rosary beads. Each page is a name, a memory, a symptom, a scream. Each page is Mary's scarf, still frayed, still red. Visitors still come. Students, journalists, curious children. They ask you to tell the story and you oblige, though your voice cracks and your breath shortens. They nod, wide-eyed, but when they leave, you know they'll repeat it with more drama than truth. You've made your peace. Legends have their own hunger. Christmas Eve, 1900. You light your candles, as always. One for Mary, one for the children, one for yourself. The room glows gold against the frost, shadows dancing like familiar silhouettes. Outside you hear carols, bright, jolly, confident. They sound foreign to you, too clean, too careless. But then a knock at the door interrupts. It's your neighbor's boy, cheeks flushed, clutching a book. Not your notebook, someone else's. A collection of ghost stories. He asks, "Can you read us the one about the poisoned Christmas?" His eyes shine with the thrill of it, the same thrill that once came with ghost tales of rattling chains. You want to say no. You want to tell him it wasn't a ghost story. It was real. It was blood and bile and graves. But his smile disarms you, so you sit him by the fire and open your own notebook instead. You tell it again, not the polished version, not the embellished carol, but the truth. The cold beer, the sudden pain, the endless funerals. His smile fades, replaced by awe, then sorrow. When you finish, he whispers, "I'll remember," and you believe him. Perhaps the story doesn't need legends. Perhaps it just needs witnesses, however young. You hand him your first volume. Keep it safe. That night, sleep creeps in like a friend at last. Your breath rasps, your bones ache, but your mind feels lighter than it has in decades. You dream of Mary, scarf bright as new, laughter unbroken. She holds out a mug, clear water gleaming inside, and for the first time since that cursed Christmas, you drink without fear. Warmth floods you, steady, gentle, clean. When dawn comes, the neighbor finds you in your chair, candle burned low, notebook closed on your lap. Your face is soft, your hands folded, as though you simply stepped into memory and stayed there. The boy keeps your notebook. He grows, he tells the story, and his children tell it after him. The details blur, of course, they always do. Some say the beer glowed, others swear the dead sang. But at the heart of it, the warning remains. Beware sweetness that hides teeth. Beware the toast too cheap to trust. Manchester forgets your name in time, but it never forgets the poisoned Christmas. It becomes a carol of its own, sung not in churches but around fireplaces, half in jest, half in dread. And so the story outlives you, outlives everyone, carried on the breath of winter. The poisoned Christmas is no longer just history. It is folklore, a ghost that clings to every pint poured in December, whispering caution in the foam, a shadow flickering at the edge of every candlelit carol, a reminder that joy is fragile, that trust must be earned, that even celebration can curdle into sorrow. And though your voice has gone silent, it echoes in every retelling. Every time the tale is whispered, you are there, sitting by the fire, notebook in hand, reminding the living. Memory itself is survival, and in the hush that follows, when laughter dies and silence stretches, someone always asks, "But could it happen again?" The answer hangs heavy in the air, because the truth is simple and terrifying. Yes, negligence doesn't die, it only waits. By the early 1900s, the poisoned Christmas had slipped its chains and wandered far beyond Manchester. The tale wasn't just local folklore anymore. It had become an export, the city's most morbid contribution to the wider world. Sailors carried it to Liverpool, London, even across the Atlantic. In New York, dock workers whispered about the Manchester pint that kills. In Dublin, fiddlers wove it into songs. On German Christmas markets, some merchants swore under their breath that the English poisoned their own beer, because what better insult than accusing a nation of brewing death at Christmas? The legend spread like spilled ale, staining every table it touched. But while the world twisted the story into a Gothic carnival act, Manchester itself carried a quieter burden. Survivors were dying out, their memories replaced with cartoons in newspapers and exaggerated anecdotes. Children in school recited it like scripture. Arsenic in the sugar, hundreds gone, lessons learned. Teachers skipped over the retching, the cramps, the skin blistering from within. Why frighten children with the real body count when the neat, moralized version sounded so much tidier? The poisoned Christmas was turning into what Victorians loved best, a morality tale with just enough gore to keep listeners awake, but not enough to sicken them. You, older and brittle as cracked sugar, refused that sanitized version. Every time someone asked, you described it exactly. The way throats burned, the way eyes glazed, the way vomit steamed in the December frost. People winced, begged you to spare them the detail, but you didn't. Because details are what make the dead live again. Without them, Mary's scarf might as well be a prop. Without them, Manchester's tragedy might as well be a bedtime story. And you knew better. Bedtime stories didn't peel skin from bone. Meanwhile, writers discovered the poisoned Christmas was a goldmine. Penny dreadfuls spun it into pulp. Demons brewing ale in hell. Skeleton brewers clinking mugs. Respectable magazines wrapped it in moralizing prose, warning readers about the dangers of greed, drunkenness, or science gone mad. Even poets dipped their quills into arsenic. On Christmas night, they raised their beer and found that death was hiding near. It rhymed. It sold. It wasn't true. You bought every issue anyway, tearing out pages and pasting them into your growing mountain of notebooks. If the world insisted on lying about what happened, you'd at least catalogue the lies. And lies multiplied fast. By the 1910s, a travelling theatre troupe performed a Christmas melodrama called The Ale of Doom. The brewer was played as a moustache-twirling villain who cackled while pouring arsenic into barrels. Victims clutched their stomachs and staggered dramatically before collapsing on stage. The audience gasped, cheered, laughed. Some even threw coins. You sat in the back once, watching the performance with a mouthful of bile. It wasn't tragedy. It was circus. When the crowd applauded the villain's downfall, you left, notebook clutched tight, muttering that Manchester had been reduced to pantomime, history had become cheap theatre, again, and yet a sliver of you admired it. Because at least the story was alive. At least no one had forgotten. Even twisted, even mocked, it was there, like arsenic itself, invisible but present, working slowly through generations. If Manchester had to be remembered as the city that poisoned itself at Christmas, then so be it. Better remembered as a fool than forgotten as a corpse. The newspapers during the Great War dredged the tale back up again, this time drawing parallels. The Christmas of arsenic, when negligence killed as surely as shells. They used the tragedy as metaphor, bending it into propaganda. Soldiers in trenches received clippings about Manchester's poisoned pint, followed by assurances that Britain now learned from mistakes, that no ration would ever poison its brave men. You smirked bitterly. If the government could turn arsenic into patriotism, nothing was sacred. Somewhere in France, a boy probably read about Manchester's Christmas while chewing on hardtack crawling with weevils, and laughed himself sick. By the 1920s, spiritualists had seized the tale. Seances claimed to summon the souls of the poisoned. Mediums in darkened parlors announced voices whispering, "Never trust sweet drink." People gasped, clutched pearls, and paid extra for follow-up sessions. You attended once purely out of spite. The medium draped in velvet insisted Mary's spirit was present, begging forgiveness. You stood, cane trembling in hand, and snarled, "Mary never begged anyone for anything. She laughed in the face of pain." The room froze. You stormed out, leaving gasps in your wake. Maybe you embarrassed yourself, but you'd rather shame a fraud than let them puppeteer your dead. The poisoned Christmas even crept into music halls. Vaudeville comedians cracked jokes about Manchester mixers. Comic songs described ale so strong it could kill. The audience roared. Laughter became the final disguise for grief. You sat at the edge of the crowd, not laughing, not anymore. But you noticed something important. The story was surviving. Not accurately, not respectfully, but stubbornly. And maybe that's what stories do best. They rot truth away and sprout new roots in nonsense. Yet the core, the poisoned ale, the Christmas of death, stayed intact. And that meant Manchester would never fully escape it. And neither would you. Each December, your candle ritual continued, though your hand shook so badly you nearly toppled the flame. You whispered names anyway, reciting them like scripture. Mary, the children, the workers, the widows. Outside, laughter drifted from pubs where men raised mugs and toasted, "At least it's not arsenic this year." They thought it was funny. You thought it was survival disguised as humor. You shut your notebook, closed your eyes, and muttered to yourself, "History is poison, and we keep drinking it anyway." By the 1930s, the poisoned Christmas had officially escaped into folklore territory. Folklorists with spectacles and tweed jackets came sniffing around Manchester, jotting down versions of the tale from old widows who hadn't even been born when the beer flowed, but swore they remembered the night clearly. Memory had become a hand-me-down coat, patched, altered, and worn proudly regardless of whether it fit. Some swore the victims all died instantly after the first gulp. Others insisted the ale hissed like boiling water. A few added supernatural flourishes, phantom bells tolling, mugs that refilled themselves, rats lining up in solemn procession to drink beside the humans. The folklorists scribbled every version greedily, as though the truth mattered less than the harvest of stories. You, of course, still sat with your notebooks. By then, 12 volumes. Some pages spotted with age, others stiff from candle wax. You told the folklorists the truth, the slow poisoning, the burning stomachs, the weeks of funerals. They frowned, unimpressed. Too clinical, too bleak. They preferred the versions where skeletons danced or angels wept over mugs. You slammed your notebook shut and muttered, "Legends are cowards." But maybe you were the coward, still clinging to wounds while the world preferred its tragedies dipped in sugar. Then came another war, bigger than the first. Manchester's skies blazed under bombs, streets buckled under rubble, and the poisoned Christmas seemed, for a brief time, like a quaint footnote compared to the firestorms falling from above. But even amidst air raids, people still invoked the old tale. "At least Hitler didn't spike the beer," someone joked in a shelter, and laughter rattled off the stone walls. You sat in the corner, heart aching. Every disaster found room to drag the poisoned pint into its orbit. Arsenic in ale had become shorthand for catastrophe, an easy metaphor rolled out whenever the world grew sharp with grief. And yet something about that persistence fascinated you, because even as bombs fell, the poisoned Christmas proved indestructible. You could flatten a street, burn a factory, silence a choir, but the story kept breathing. Perhaps legends were cockroaches, ugly, irritating, impossible to kill, and maybe, in a twisted way, that meant Manchester's darkest hour had achieved immortality. You wrote that thought into your notebook one night as planes droned overhead. Our pain became pestilence. It survives everything. After the war, Manchester rebuilt itself brick by brick, smoke by smoke. And as the rubble cleared, the poisoned Christmas re-emerged like an old friend no one had invited. Newspapers dusted it off again, the tale that taught us caution. Schools taught it as local history. Taverns revived the old marketing gag, bottling Christmas ales with cheeky labels, guaranteed arsenic-free. You hated it, and yet you smiled too, because if a city could joke about its scars, maybe it meant it had survived them. Maybe it meant Mary's death wasn't just an open wound, but a scar strong enough to carry laughter. Still, new generations twisted the tale even further. By the 1950s, Horror comics adapted it into lurid panels, brewers with devil horns, vats bubbling with green sludge, customers dropping like flies while Santa Claus looked on in horror. The censors clutched their pearls, declaring such stories corrupting influences. You clipped the comic anyway and pasted it into your notebook. If Mary had to become a cartoon corpse to keep being remembered, then fine. Better that than silence, better ink than dust. And then television arrived, dragging the poisoned Christmas into living rooms. Documentaries dramatized it with shadowy reenactments, actors clutching mugs, then doubling over in slow motion. Narrators intoned gravely about Manchester's darkest holiday. Families watched between soap operas and quiz shows, murmuring, "How terrible," before changing the channel. You sat alone watching, muttering at the screen. You don't smell it, you don't taste it, you don't know. Still, you couldn't look away. Seeing actors stumble in candlelit pubs was like meeting ghosts wearing other people's faces. It felt wrong. It felt right. It felt inevitable. Meanwhile, pubs leaned harder into branding. The Poisoned Pint became a tourist stop, selling arsenic ale in novelty mugs shaped like skulls. Students drank there for dares. Couples went there on dates. A tragedy that once shattered families was now a marketing gimmick. And yet, every time a new customer asked, "Wait, did this really happen?" the answer was yes. The question itself kept the story alive. Legends thrive on disbelief as much as faith. You sat in the corner again, invisible, listening. You realized your role wasn't to stop the distortions. It was to be the ghost at the feast, whispering, yes, it was real. By the 1960s, folklore collectors were back, this time with tape recorders. They shoved microphones in your face, demanding the authentic version. You rasped out the truth, though your voice cracked like old wood. When they played it back to you, your own voice sounded alien, dry, harsh, trembling. "That's what a ghost sounds like," you muttered. They laughed. You didn't. They published transcripts anyway, stripping away your pauses, your coughs, your trembling silences. Words without breath, history without blood. But at least your voice, however mangled, now sat in archives. If truth was to be embalmed, at least you had picked the coffin. And in December, as always, you lit your candles. One for Mary, one for the children, one for Manchester. Your hand trembled worse than ever, wax dripping down your fingers like molten sorrow. Outside, the city glittered with electric lights, Christmas louder and brighter than it had ever been. But inside, your room stayed small, flickering, faithful. You whispered names into the dark, the same litany you'd recited for decades, and in the quiet, you swore you heard a laugh, not cruel, not mocking. Mary's laugh, faint and warm, curling through the candle smoke. For the first time in years, you let yourself smile. By the 1970s, the poisoned Christmas had mutated again, this time into urban legend currency. Teenagers whispered it in schoolyards, not as history, but as a dare. Drink too much lager, and you'll end up like Manchester 50, stone dead by Boxing Day. It didn't matter if the facts were blurred. The story had acquired teeth sharp enough to scare and amuse in equal measure. Bands even dropped cheeky references. A punk group out of Salford belted a song called Arsenic Ale, its chorus screaming that Christmas kills. Drunk crowds moshed and laughed, never realizing they were pogoing on a graveyard. Your notebooks, meanwhile, had expanded to 15 volumes. Each one heavier than your own bones, each one smelling faintly of smoke and ink. By now you had stopped correcting people. If they said the beer glowed, you let them. If they claimed whole families exploded after a single sip, you shrugged. Truth had been drowned under retellings long ago. Instead, you documented the mutations, every rumor, every distortion, every joke. You scribbled with the fury of a man trying to catch smoke in his hands. Not because you thought you could trap it, but because you couldn't stop yourself from trying. Television found new angles. A BBC Christmas special aired titled "The Pint That Poisoned a City." The set designers leaned into melodrama, cobbled streets gleaming with fake snow, actors in soot-streaked scarves, extras collapsing theatrically in taverns. The narrator, deep and solemn, warned, this was no ghost story, but a true event that reshaped public health. Families watched with mince pies in hand, shaking their heads. Some chuckled nervously. Some turned the channel. You sat in your chair, face lit by the flicker of the television, muttering, "You weren't there. You didn't smell it, but no one heard. The broadcast moved on. Then came the era of documentaries. American crews swooped in, cameras humming, asking you to repeat the story for the record. They wanted close-ups of your trembling hands, lingering shots of your candle rituals. You hated their lens but tolerated it. Better the truth on film than another cartoon skeleton in a beer barrel. When the episode aired overseas, audiences gasped. Letters arrived from as far as Canada and Australia. Is it true? Could it happen here? You answered none of them. You didn't need to. The answer was yes. Negligence breeds everywhere. Arsenic has many disguises. By the 1980s, the poisoned Christmas had become a seasonal fixture. Tabloids ran headlines every December. The ale that killed Christmas. They recycled the same facts with fresh fonts, adding a few spooky embellishments for good measure. Children grew up thinking it was just another holiday myth, like Santa Claus with a hangover. Some schools even staged plays about it, turning the tragedy into pageant fodder. You attended one once, sitting in the back as children in fake beards pretended to keel over from poisoned beer. Parents laughed, applauded. You stared at your shoes, nails digging into your palms, whispering Mary's name like a shield. And then, inevitably, the horror movie treatment arrived. Low budget, poorly acted, but enthusiastic. Christmas Poison, splashed onto VHS shelves with a cover showing Santa holding a mug filled with bubbling green sludge. In the film, the beer didn't just kill people, it turned them into zombies. The streets of Manchester filled with groaning undead in flat caps, chasing screaming extras down cobblestones. You watched it once, jaw slack, unable to decide whether to laugh or vomit. It was absurd. It was insulting. It was also proof the story had survived another mutation. You added the tape sleeve to your notebooks, scrawling, "Truth mocked, but not erased." Tourism followed. By the late 80s, travel companies offered haunted Manchester tours, complete with stops at the old tavern sites. Guides in Victorian costumes spun exaggerated tales to wide-eyed tourists, barrels bubbling with arsenic, brewers cackling in shadows, entire streets dropping dead in unison. Visitors gasped, snapped photos, bought pint glasses engraved with skulls. You tagged along once, hood up, listening to your life retold as theatre. When the guide asked, "Any questions?" you nearly raised your hand to correct him, but then you didn't. Because what was the point? People wanted ghosts, not truth, and ghosts were what they were buying. December night still drew you back to your candles. One for Mary, one for the rest, one for yourself. Your hand shook worse now, wax dripping into your lap, but you kept lighting them. Outside, neon lights blinked and synthetic carols blared from shop windows. But inside, it was still 1850. Still ale, still death, still memory. You whispered names until your throat burned. Then you opened your notebook and added another line. They laugh, they twist, they sell. But the dead do not laugh. The dead wait. The dead listen. The 1990s brought the internet. At first, just clunky message boards where amateur historians argued over dates and numbers. But soon, stories sprouted like mold. The Christmas pint that killed Manchester became a popular post on early forums, retold with gory exaggerations. Teenagers swapped it like a dare. Drink 3 pints in under a minute and see if the ghosts of the poisoned Christmas come for you. Some even filmed themselves in grainy clips, staggering dramatically after chugging lager, tagging it as Arsenic Challenge. You scoffed at the idiocy, but you wrote it down, because legends adapt, just like poisons. And so by century's end, Manchester's poisoned Christmas was no longer just tragedy. It was an ecosystem: plays, comics, documentaries, horror flicks, tourist traps, internet dares. The story lived everywhere, in every shape, wearing every mask. You wondered if that was victory or defeat, maybe both. Maybe history always becomes parody if it survives long enough. But every parody still whispers truth. Every joke still points to the graves. You closed your notebook one more time, coughed until your chest rattled and muttered, "At least they haven't forgotten. God help us if they forget." By the 2000s, the poisoned Christmas had finally broken free of history altogether and planted itself firmly in the garden of the internet. Forums, blogs, and later social media fed on it like hungry rats in a brewery. The tale wasn't just retold, it was remixed, rebranded, weaponized as creepypasta. Teenagers uploaded shaky videos titled, The Beer That Killed Manchester, with ominous piano music and pixelated photos of skeletons holding mugs. Comment sections swarmed with half-believers. My uncle says his granddad was there. Or, if you drink 3 pints at midnight on Christmas Eve, you'll see the ghosts. The story had mutated into ritual. Urban legends love a dare, and this one was too perfect to resist. By 2005, videos of the Arsenic Ale Challenge spread across YouTube's infancy. Kids downing pints of cheap lager in their bedrooms, then collapsing theatrically out of frame while ominous Christmas bells played in the background. Some pranksters went further, filling mugs with food coloring and dry ice to make the liquid smoke, claiming it was the original recipe. Comments alternated between fake and "I tried this, and I swear I saw shadows in my room." The poisoned Christmas had become not just folklore, but entertainment as haunting. Academics, naturally, tried to reel it back in. Journal articles dissected the legend as an example of industrial-era trauma lingering in collective memory. Professors lectured about how Manchester's tragedy symbolized the dangers of unregulated capitalism, how the internet had twisted it into myth. Students yawned. They'd rather watch a jump-scare video where Santa vomits green slime after drinking cursed ale. Still, the research papers circulated, adding a thin veneer of seriousness to a story that had long since slipped into the carnival of the absurd. You'd have laughed if laughing didn't make your ribs ache. Meanwhile, Manchester itself leaned into the fame. The Christmas markets began selling poisoned Christmas ale, a harmless spiced beer in novelty bottles stamped with skull and holly labels. Tourists queued eagerly, snapping selfies, mugs raised high. The city council even debated installing a plaque commemorating the event. The draft text read, "In 1850, Manchester suffered tragedy when arsenic-tainted beer killed many at Christmas. This event inspired the birth of food safety laws." You imagined Mary's ghost spitting on that plaque, furious that her death had been reduced to a neat line of civic pride. But then, maybe she'd laugh instead. Sarcasm was always her shield. Folklorists rebranded the tale for a digital age. Podcasts dramatized it with eerie background music, narrators whispering about barrels bubbling with arsenic under snowy roofs. "This is not a legend," they intoned. "This is history." Listeners shivered in their cars, nodding, then turned up the volume on Mariah Carey. TikTok arrived, and soon teenagers filmed themselves standing in front of taverns in Manchester, lip-syncing ghostly carols while mugs of ale glowed with neon filters. Some videos claimed you could still hear coughing in the cobbled alleys on Christmas Eve. Others warned that if you walked past certain pubs at midnight, the smell of arsenic sugar would sting your nose. The comments always split, half laughter, half goosebumps. And that was the poisoned Christmas in the 21st century, half joke, half warning, part satire, part seance. It didn't matter that no living soul remembered the convulsions, the funerals, the taste of metallic sweetness on the tongue. The internet had decided the poisoned Christmas was content, and content never dies. It just reloads with better resolution. Some nights, scrolling through feeds, you saw your own story staring back at you in forms you barely recognized. Animated skeletons chugging neon pints. Teenagers narrating badly researched summaries in exaggerated, spooky voices. Tour guides live-streaming their haunted pub crawls, cashing donations in real time. You muttered at the screen, "I was there. I smelled it. I buried her." Nobody listened. But you added another line to your notebook anyway. The poisoned Christmas now lives in pixels. Ghosts don't need bodies. They need bandwidth. What struck you most was how young people clung to it, not because they believed the exact details, but because the poisoned Christmas gave them a ritual of fear. They wanted to gather in dark rooms, whisper the tale, and dare each other to drink. They wanted a brush with death, safe behind the glow of a screen. You envied them in a way. They could play at ghosts. You carried the real ones heavy and hungry every December. One Christmas Eve you lit your candles as usual. Outside, fireworks cracked over the market, lights flashing red and green against the smoke. Inside, your hand trembled so badly you almost dropped the match. But you managed. One flame for Mary, one for the children, one for yourself. You whispered names into the silence, though your voice was thin as thread. And for the first time in years, you allowed yourself a strange comfort. The story wasn't forgotten. It had warped, mutated, turned into memes and dares. but it was alive. And if memory is survival, then Mary survived too. Not in stone, not in truth, but in whispers, in jokes, in hashtags. Maybe that was enough. Later that night, as you drifted towards sleep, you imagined a future where the poisoned Christmas lived forever, not as tragedy, not as history, but as a campfire story passed down in endless new forms. A VR horror game, perhaps, a holographic tavern reenactment, a Christmas playlist track called Arsenic Bells. The possibilities were absurd, but that was the point. Absurdity is how pain endures when people can't look at it straight. You smiled bitterly, muttering one last line for your notebook. Even poison can ferment into folklore. By the 2010s, the poisoned Christmas wasn't just Manchester's secret anymore. It had gone global, uploaded, reformatted, and spat out in half a dozen digital dialects. Reddit threads popped up every December, rehashing the tale under titles like "The Beer That Killed Christmas" or "True Creepy History, Don't Drink the Ale." Commenters argued about numbers, symptoms, even recipes. One self-proclaimed historian insisted the victims all dropped dead within seconds. Another swore it was a government plot to thin the working class. A third just posted fake lol and got more upvotes than anyone. History had become a meme battlefield, and truth never wins meme battles. YouTube turned the poisoned Christmas into an endless buffet of spooky content. Animated channels with gravelly narrators uploaded 10-minute videos padded with eerie sound effects and fake coughing in the background. Some even pasted Mary's name into clickbait titles, turning her into a brand. Mary's Last Pint, the woman who drank poison on Christmas Eve. The thumbnails always showed skeletons in Santa hats. The comments were full of "so sad, rip Mary," and "imagine dying from beer, lol." You clenched your jaw watching them, whispering, she was real, not a thumbnail. But the algorithm didn't care. The algorithm never does. Then TikTok arrived, and with it, the poisoned Christmas became performance art. Teenagers filmed themselves in pub bathrooms, whispering into mirrors, "If you say arsenic ale 3 times at midnight on Christmas Eve, the ghosts of Manchester will appear." Some staged jump scares, a pale friend bursting in from behind the shower curtain. Others sprinkled sugar on the floor, calling it summoning powder. Millions watched, millions laughed, millions repeated. The poisoned Christmas had officially joined Bloody Mary, Slender Man, and all the other modern campfire monsters. Your Mary had become meme currency, and you kept writing, notebook open, pen scratching. Mary's laugh reduced to hashtags. Meanwhile, travel bloggers discovered the tourism angle. Videos titled "Haunted Pubs of Manchester" racked up millions of views. Influencers posed with novelty mugs stamped with skulls, captioning their posts, "Drinking arsenic-free ale, is Manchester the Christmas?" Viewers commented, "OMG, so spooky," and "Is this real history?" The answer was yes, but filtered, edited, monetized. The poisoned Christmas wasn't tragedy anymore. It was content, a backdrop for selfies, a seasonal algorithm boost. You muttered at your screen, "We buried 200 people for your hashtags." Nobody heard. Or maybe they did and scrolled anyway. Creepypasta writers flocked to the tale, remixing it into horror fiction. One story claimed that if you opened an old beer barrel in Manchester today, you'd unleash the spirits of the poisoned. Another described a cursed calendar counting down to a Christmas where arsenic returned to every glass. Some were laughably bad, some chillingly good. All of them were read by millions online. Readers whispered them to each other in dorm rooms, basements, late-night group chats. Manchester's nightmare had been reborn as digital campfire fuel, sparking fear not with facts but with vibes. And fear, even artificial, is still power. By then, your notebooks were ancient relics. Students from universities visited you, scanning every page into glowing databases. They spoke of preservation and open access, but you knew better. Your handwriting would become pixels, shuffled into clouds, floating away where ghosts couldn't follow. You agreed anyway. Better the cloud than the landfill. Better immortality as data than silence. And yet when you saw Mary's name typed in sterile fonts on a website, stripped of the curve of your hand, you muttered, "That's not her. That's a corpse of ink." But the students smiled, satisfied, as if they'd bottled history. Christmas Eve 2015. You lit your candles again, though your fingers shook so badly you burned one wick twice. Outside, fireworks cracked, and across the city, phones filmed everything. Somewhere, a group of teenagers probably chanted "arsenic ale" into a mirror. Somewhere else, a podcast host whispered the tale into a microphone, milking at revenue. Somewhere else, a YouTuber edited green smoke over a pint glass for dramatic effect. The poisoned Christmas had never been louder, never more visible. And yet in your room it had never felt lonelier. You whispered Mary's name to the flame. No likes, no comments, just silence. But silence is where ghosts breathe best. And you swore that night you heard her laugh again, soft, mocking, alive. Not from the internet, not from the podcasts, not from the hashtags, from the candle, from the crackle of wax, from memory itself. You closed your notebook slowly, as if afraid to scare it away. You whispered, "Still here," and in the corner of your ear you thought you heard, "Always." The poisoned Christmas had conquered centuries. It had mutated from tragedy into folklore, from folklore into legend, from legend into memes, from memes into algorithms. It had survived bombs, fashion, jokes, and boredom, and you knew deep in your bones that it would survive long after your bones were dust, because some poisons don't leave the body. They stay in the bloodstream of culture, pumping forever. Manchester's Christmas was one of them, and every December, when laughter grows too loud, it whispers through the cracks, "Sweetness can kill. Joy has teeth. Beware the pint." By the 2020s, the poisoned Christmas had finished its transformation into a digital phantom. It no longer lived in Manchester's pubs or on the lips of Soot Street workers. It lived in earbuds, on screens, in the glowing rectangles people clutched as they fell asleep. YouTube channels specializing in scary bedtime stories discovered the tale and milked it like an immortal cow. Titles screamed, "The Christmas Where Everyone Drank Poison," or "Boring Christmas for Sleep," until the ale killed them. The thumbnails, always the same. Mugs brimming with green liquid, a skull grinning behind a sprig of holly. The algorithm loved it. Viewers drifted off listening to Manchester choking on arsenic, their dreams haunted not by Santa, but by stomach cramps. Podcasts followed suit. Some narrated the story straight, layering eerie bells and fake coughing over the narration. Others went wild, rewriting it as if the poisoned ale had opened a gateway to hell, or as if Mary had risen as a ghost to curse every pint poured on Christmas Eve. Millions listened while commuting, cooking, or lying in bed. The comments filled with, "I love falling asleep to this one, so cozy." Cozy. Imagine calling mass vomiting and funerals cozy. You wanted to crawl out of your grave just to slap the word out of their mouths, but you couldn't. You were just another ghost trapped in the algorithm's playlist. Meanwhile, TikTok spun the poisoned Christmas into trends. One filter made beer glow neon green. Users lip-synced to distorted carols while pretending to collapse. Another trend involved sprinkling sugar on the floor and filming yourself whispering "arsenic ale" into the camera 3 times. If the lights flickered, commenters swore the ghosts were real. Some even stitched videos of themselves coughing dramatically, blood capsules spilling from their mouths. Millions of views, millions of laughs. Manchester had become a haunted stage, replayed every December by strangers who thought arsenic was just a cool aesthetic. And yet, beneath the jokes, something darker simmered. Reddit's horror forums took the poisoned Christmas seriously. Entire threads speculated that not all deaths had been recorded, that mass graves lay hidden under Manchester streets, that the government still covered up the true numbers. Others claimed modern beer companies secretly used arsenic-laced sugar to keep the tradition alive. A few posts went full conspiracy. Ever notice more people get sick around Christmas? It's the ghosts in the ale. Conspiracies always cling to history like mold, and the poisoned Christmas proved irresistible. What began as fact had become folklore, and what became folklore had mutated into paranoia. Academics noticed too. Papers popped up in journals with titles like "The Digital Afterlife of Industrial Tragedy" and "From Ale to Algorithm, Manchester's Poisoned Christmas as Viral Folklore." Professors argued that the story's endurance proved humanity's need for seasonal monsters. Krampus, Bloody Mary, now arsenic beer. Students rolled their eyes, then shared poisoned Christmas TikToks between lectures. No one escaped it, not even the scholars. Meanwhile, Manchester itself had gone all in. The Christmas markets now sold souvenir bottles of arsenic ale spiced beer, complete with collectible labels depicting skeleton Santas. Haunted pub tours expanded, promising authentic arsenic experiences, which really meant dim lights and actors coughing theatrically in corners. Even the city's tourist website leaned into it. Come for the markets, stay for the ghosts of Christmas 1850. The poisoned Christmas wasn't just legend anymore, it was brand identity. And every December, faceless channels uploaded another retelling. Some slow and soothing, meant to lull insomniacs into slumber. Others fast and flashy, designed for TikTok scrolls. Some sarcastic, some sincere, all of them feeding the machine. Listeners didn't know whether they wanted fear, comfort, or both, but the poisoned Christmas gave it to them anyway. The tale had become an ambidextrous ghost, scaring some, soothing others, laughing all the while. But here's the thing about ghosts. They don't die when you stop believing in them. They die when you stop telling their story. And the poisoned Christmas, it had become unstoppable. You could smash barrels, bury bodies, pass laws, rebuild cities, even digitize the tale into ones and zeros, but it always came back. Every December it slipped into playlists, feeds, hashtags, and whispered rituals. Every December, someone raised a glass, laughed nervously, and muttered, "At least it's not arsenic." And every December the ghosts leaned closer, smiling, because maybe that's what survival means now. Not living in flesh, but in endless retellings. Maybe the poisoned Christmas no longer belongs to Manchester, or to history, or to truth. Maybe it belongs to the storytellers, the sleepless, the sarcastic narrators pumping it into the void. Every time the tale is told, the ghosts get another sip, another laugh, another breath. And as long as someone listens, whether to learn, to laugh, or to drift off into poisoned dreams, the Christmas of arsenic never ends. So tonight, as you lie in bed, headphones in, listening to this story, ask yourself, what are you really drinking? Just sound? Just history? Or maybe, just maybe, a taste of the same sweetness that killed? Careful. Legends have teeth, and sometimes when you close your eyes, they bite. By the mid-2020s, the poisoned Christmas had become less a story and more a seasonal industry. Every December, like clockwork, it returned, packaged, rebranded, monetized. Streaming services dropped glossy documentaries with slow pans over Victorian pubs and reenacted coughing fits. True crime podcasts slotted it between murders and missing persons cases. YouTube pushed out new for sleep narrations, each one identical except for the thumbnail color. Even Spotify got in on it. Playlists titled Creepy Christmas Legends always opened with Manchester's poisoned ale, as if nothing else deserved first billing. What had once been tragedy now functioned like tinsel, predictable decoration for the season. Online, it became ritual. Subreddits posted mega threads every December 23rd. Share your favorite version of the poisoned Christmas. Thousands of comments flooded in. Memes, links, jokes, conspiracy theories. TikTok rolled out new filters. One made beer glow arsenic green, another added ghostly coughing sounds to your background. Influencers timed uploads for Christmas Eve, knowing the algorithm adored the phrase arsenic ale, and so the cycle spun. Tragedy, folklore, meme, content, ad revenue. Mary and the others had been converted into SEO keywords, and yet, strangely, the story had never felt more alive. Some corners of the internet pushed it further. Discord servers dedicated to dark Christmas rituals organized live stream events. At midnight GMT, participants around the world raised glasses of beer or soda or water, whispered the old legend, and toasted the ghosts. Screens flickered with thousands of webcams, faces half lit by fairy lights, mugs lifted in eerie unison. Then came the fake collapses, participants pretending to choke or vanish. The chat exploded with laughing emojis and skull icons. Was it parody, performance art, or a new kind of seance conducted through Wi-Fi? No one could quite tell. Maybe it didn't matter. Academics noticed. Again, this time not historians but anthropologists. Papers with titles like Digital Necromancy, Seasonal Rituals in Online Communities argued that the poisoned Christmas had become a shared liturgy, proof that the internet generates its own folklore faster than history can keep up. The scholars claimed the ritual wasn't about believing in ghosts, but about belonging, about marking time with a collective shiver, a shared joke with teeth. Students cited Manchester alongside Krampus, La Llorona, Slender Man. The poisoned Christmas had joined the pantheon of global monsters. its mug raised proudly among demons and drowned mothers. Industrial tragedy had evolved into mythology. Meanwhile, Manchester leaned harder into branding. The Christmas market expanded its arsenic-free ale stalls, now with augmented reality experiences. Point your phone at the mug, and ghostly Victorian drinkers coughed in your camera view. Tour guides wore VR headsets to show tourists exactly how the poisoned pub looked in 1850, complete with simulated convulsions. Kids loved it. Parents filmed it. TikTok devoured it. What once smelled of bile and fear now smelled of cinnamon and mulled wine, sanitized for tourists. But at the core, the warning remained. Every label still carried the cheeky line, "Tested safe," and everyone still laughed nervously before sipping. Yet beneath the commercialization, something uncanny began to grow. Some people reported dreams after listening to poisoned Christmas narrations, dreams of taverns full of coughing, of mugs sweating poison, of names they'd never heard but felt certain were real. A Reddit user claimed she dreamt of a woman in a frayed red scarf who whispered, "Remember me." Others chimed in, swearing they'd seen the same figure. Threads exploded with theories: mass suggestion, shared archetype, algorithmic haunting. Psychologists dismissed it as coincidence. Folklorists called it collective dream folklore, but those who dreamt insisted it felt too sharp, too specific, as if the ghosts were learning to travel through Wi-Fi. By 2027, creepypasta writers had weaponized this. Stories proliferated about cursed videos. If you watched a poisoned Christmas retelling at exactly midnight, your screen would freeze on a candle-lit woman in a red scarf. If you paused, her eyes would flick toward you. If you closed the laptop, you'd hear coughing in your room. Some claimed your beer would taste metallic afterward. Fake? Absolutely. Popular? Beyond measure. Kids dared each other to try it, uploaded reaction clips of themselves screaming, racking up millions of views. The poisoned Christmas had become a digital Bloody Mary, summoned not by mirrors, but by streaming. And yet, the line between parody and haunting blurred. Reports trickled in of glitches, audio distortions during narrations, strange coughing noises not in the original file, sudden bursts of laughter. Tech support blamed corrupted files. Believers blamed the ghosts. A podcast host swore his microphone picked up a voice whispering, "Sweetness kills," though he was alone in the studio. Another claimed her hard drive wiped itself after uploading a retelling. True? Fabricated? Marketing stunt? Impossible to tell. But the internet doesn't care about truth, it cares about retellings, and the poisoned Christmas had endless fuel. Every December the cycle repeated. Hashtags trended, memes spawned, ghost tours sold out, and somewhere in countless bedrooms, people lay down with earbuds and listened to soothing voices describe arsenic, convulsions, funerals. They called it cozy. They called it relaxing. They drifted into sleep on Manchester's corpses. And if they dreamt of taverns, of coughing, of a woman in a red scarf, they rarely admitted it. But you know they did, because some poisons never leave the bloodstream. They linger, patient, waiting for another toast. So tonight, as you scroll, as you sip, as you laugh at memes about poisoned ale, ask yourself, is it still just a story? Or has the story become ritual, and the ritual become real? If thousands raise glasses together online, does it matter whether the ghosts exist? Because maybe they don't need to. Maybe all they need is remembrance, and in that case, congratulations. You've already given them what they want. By the 2030s, the poisoned Christmas had become global folklore. Not just Manchester's story anymore. Every country seemed to graft its own version onto the skeleton. In Spain, they whispered about La Cerveza de la Muerte, the Christmas beer cursed by monks. In Brazil, kids dared each other with tales of a cerveja fantasma, where drinkers supposedly woke to find their insides turned to glass. In the Philippines, ghost tours claimed a colonial tavern once served arsenic punch at Christmas. None of it was historically true. All of it traced back to Manchester. But legends don't care about passports. They migrate like viruses, mutating in translation. Academics dubbed this phenomenon arsenic diaspora. Papers appeared in international journals. Globalization of poisoned rituals. The ale heard round the world. Professors explained how one industrial accident metastasized into a myth shared across continents. Conference panels debated whether the poisoned Christmas was now part of the same global canon as Krampus or Santa Claus. Meanwhile, teenagers on TikTok made parody videos pretending to die dramatically after drinking Coke, captioned, "When you realize it's Manchester Ale." Scholars argued footnotes, kids argued emojis, both kept the ghosts alive. Manchester, never shy about exploiting itself, doubled down. By 2035, the city launched the Arsenic Ale Festival. Stalls served toxic mocktails with glowing green ice cubes. Augmented reality headsets let tourists experience convulsions in taverns recreated in VR. Merch flooded the market. Mugs, hoodies, even Christmas ornaments shaped like skulls in Santa hats. Airlines ran ads. "Fly to Manchester this Christmas, if you dare." Economists praised the festival's revenue boost. Survivors would have spat in their faces, but survivors were long gone. Only the legend remained, and legends don't protest, they sell. Still, not everyone laughed. Fringe groups emerged online claiming the festival was a desecration. Forums filled with furious posts. "They turned our ancestors into cosplay." Some demanded solemn memorials instead of carnival rides. Others insisted the commercialization had angered the spirits. Stories circulated of tourists collapsing at the festival after drinking cursed mugs. Medical reports said dehydration or too much alcohol. Believers swore it was vengeance. Every December, a few viral clips showed festival-goers staggering, coughing, clutching their stomachs. Hoaxes? Probably. Effective? Definitely. Fear, like arsenic, only needs a trace amount to poison belief. Meanwhile, folklore mutated in fascinating ways. In America, the poisoned Christmas fused with prohibition law. Some claimed bootleggers deliberately poisoned beer in honor of Manchester. In Japan, manga artists adapted it into horror comics. Wide-eyed victims sipping glowing mugs, their skin blistering into snowflakes. In Nigeria, storytellers reimagined it as a cautionary tale about colonial greed, with poisoned sugar shipped from empire to empire. Each culture reshaped it, claiming it as their own. Manchester's tragedy had become a blank canvas, painted over with every color of human fear. And then came the AI narrators, voices smoother than human throats, faces generated by code, churning out endless retellings of the poisoned Christmas in every language. Millions tuned in, lulled to sleep by synthetic whispers about arsenic and death. Ironically, some of those voices sounded almost too real, breathy, weary, trembling. Listeners swore they heard coughing in the pauses, or faint laughter in the static. Programmers dismissed it as glitches. Believers swore it was the ghosts hacking the code. A new conspiracy bloomed, that Manchester's victims had uploaded themselves into the data stream, haunting the very voices retelling their deaths. And maybe in a strange way they had, because the more people listened, the more vivid the story became. Dreams grew sharper, recurring. People on opposite continents reported nearly identical nightmares. Taverns thick with smoke, mugs sweating poison. A woman in a red scarf whispering, "Remember." Online forums tracked these dreams like sightings of UFOs. Coincidence? Collective imagination? Or had the poisoned Christmas finally evolved into something more than memory, something parasitic, living inside servers, signals, and sleep? By 2038, the poisoned Christmas was no longer just folklore. It was an ecosystem, a global holiday parasite. Every December, hashtags trended, documentaries streamed, creepy bedtime channels uploaded. Cities hosted festivals, and scattered among the noise always were whispers of the red-scarfed woman, the coughs, the metallic taste in dreams. The line between story and haunting blurred into smoke. But here's the cruelest twist. The poisoned Christmas had become comforting. Millions now associated it with cozy rituals. Candles, mugs, storytelling by firelight or screen glow. They fell asleep to it, laughed about it, wore it on t-shirts. What once smelled of bile and death now smelled of cinnamon and nostalgia. The horror had been domesticated, the poison had been sweetened, and that perhaps was the ultimate joke. Not that people forgot, but that they remembered wrong, smiling, sipping, calling it tradition. Yet in the quiet corners, forums, discords, late-night DMs, the old truth still flickered. Survivors' names resurfaced in databases. Historians pushed against the noise, publishing careful reconstructions of 1850. Some listeners leaned close to their headphones and whispered, "Mary," like a prayer. How few even left candles in windows on Christmas Eve, not for Santa but for the poisoned dead. And sometimes, walking home past glowing streets, someone swore they smelled something faint on the wind. Not mulled wine, not roasted chestnuts, but metallic sweetness, sharp and cold. The taste of history that refuses to stay buried. So now, when you raise your glass this Christmas, wherever you are, Manchester, Madrid, Manila, ask yourself, who are you toasting? The ghosts, the memes, the corporations selling t-shirts, or maybe, just maybe, the woman in the red scarf, still waiting in the shadows of the story, whispering, "Remember me." By the 2040s, the poisoned Christmas had evolved past folklore, past meme, past even globalized creepypasta. It had crept into something stranger, faith, not mainstream, of course. But on the fringes, in the shadows of the internet, communities began treating the tale less like a ghost story and more like scripture. Forums turned into temples, Discord channels into chapels. Members called themselves the Bitter Congregation, meeting every December to drink in remembrance. They weren't drinking beer, though. They brewed dark, bitter teas spiked with sugar crystals dyed green, chanting about the sweetness that kills. From the outside, it looked like cosplay. From the inside, it felt like ritual. At first, these digital congregations seemed like harmless roleplay. Users shared candlelit selfies, mugs raised to their webcams, captions reading, "1 pint for the dead, 1 sip for the living." But over time, doctrine crept in. Leaders emerged, self-appointed prophets with usernames like Alebearer and Red Scarf Witness. They posted long manifestos about the poison of greed and the holiness of bitterness. To them, Manchester 1850 wasn't just history. It was revelation, proof that joy is always tainted, that sweetness hides teeth, that celebration carries a cost. And people listened, because every December, when the world grew loud with plastic cheer, the idea of poisoned joy rang uncomfortably true. Rituals spread. Members of the Bitter Congregation began fasting from sugar for the week before Christmas, calling it the Purge of Sweetness. On Christmas Eve, they gathered online, thousands strong, to watch synchronized streams of arsenic documentaries, candles flickering in their rooms. Some claimed visions, taverns filling their screens unbidden, coughing echoing through their headphones even on mute. A woman in a red scarf stepping into the glow of their webcams. Were they lying, dreaming, or had the ghosts learned a new language? Binary, broadband prayers. Whatever the truth, believers swore it was real. Manchester, always quick to monetize, tried to shut them down at first. Officials feared tourists wouldn't like the idea of their funny poisoned beer festival being linked to online cults. But attempts at bans only made the groups grow louder. Soon, splinter sects emerged. The Green Froth sect claimed the poisoned Christmas was prophecy, that one day every sweet drink in the world would turn toxic as punishment for human greed. The Silent Mug Order vowed to never toast again, carrying empty cups as symbols of mourning. Each faction carved its own theology out of the same bitter root. Scholars swooped in naturally. Articles with titles like "Arsenic as Sacrament, the Digital Religion of Poisoned Christmas" appeared in journals. Anthropologists treated Bitter Congregation rituals with the same seriousness once reserved for ancient cults. Psychologists debated whether participants were delusional or simply starved for meaning. But the congregants didn't care. They didn't need validation from academia. They had Mary's ghost, whispering through their headphones every December, "Remember me." Stories grew darker. Some claimed entire families joined in the rituals, lighting candles together, whispering names into the night. Others whispered about tragedies. A man who drank real arsenic-laced homebrew to be closer to the dead. A woman who vanished after posting a final video of herself whispering, "The sweetness is here." Were these true? Nobody knew. Nobody cared. Every rumor fed the legend. Every death, real or invented, was folded back into the poisoned Christmas, expanding its mythology like yeast in warm water. By 2047, physical spaces began to appear. Not churches exactly, more like shrines. In back alleys on forgotten side streets, tiny rooms were dressed with flickering lights and shelves of mugs. Visitors left sugar packets as offerings. Some lit candles, whispering prayers. "Keep my joy bitter. Keep my sweetness safe." Tourists snapped photos, rolled their eyes, But locals grew uneasy, because every city has its ghosts, and once you start giving them altars, they multiply. Meanwhile, the mainstream world kept laughing. Talk shows joked about the arsenic cult, late-night hosts pretending to sip poison on air. Memes spread of skeletons in Santa hats captioned "Merry Toxic Maz." But behind the jokes, unease lingered. Because who really controls folklore once it leaves history behind? Not governments, not academics, not even corporations. Folklore belongs to the mouths that repeat it. And now, the poisoned Christmas belonged to thousands, chanting in dim rooms across the globe. And here's the strangest part. Sometimes outsiders crashed their online rituals just to mock. They spammed chats with laughter, derailed streams with memes. But more than once, those intruders swore something unnerving happened. Coughs on their mics, mugs on their desks tipping over by themselves, the faint smell of burnt sugar in their rooms. Coincidence? Hoax? Or the ghosts finally fed enough memory to bite back? By the end of the decade, Manchester officials stopped resisting and leaned into it. They erected a monument in the Christmas Market Square, a massive iron mug, steam perpetually rising from it, lit from below in green. Tourists flocked, congregants bowed, locals muttered, uneasy. Every December, the mug steamed brighter, crowds gathered, and somewhere in the laughter you could almost hear coughing. Almost. So now when you hear about the poisoned Christmas, whether in a bedtime story, a podcast, a meme, or a digital ritual, ask yourself, are you just listening? Or are you participating? Because every retelling, every joke, every hashtag is another sip offered to the dead. And they've been thirsty for a long, long time. By the 2050s, the poisoned Christmas no longer stayed politely in the realm of folklore and bedtime stories. It began leaking back into the physical world, like arsenic seeping through rotten wood. At first, it was small incidents. A pub in Birmingham reported dozens of patrons falling violently ill on Christmas Eve, vomiting until dawn. Lab tests confirmed it was just contaminated cleaning chemicals. But the tabloids screamed, "Another poisoned Christmas," and the story trended worldwide. People didn't believe the science. They believed the legend. Supermarkets scrambled. Suddenly, every December, shoppers eyed sugar suspiciously, scanned beer labels twice, demanded proof of purity. Breweries leaned into it, stamping bottles with green warning seals that read, "Tested safe." Of course they were safe, but the nervous laughter at checkout lines said otherwise. Conspiracies festered online, that corporations were secretly reenacting Manchester 1850, thinning the population with holiday poison. Forums lit up with blurry photos of tainted barrels and green froth spotted in pubs. None of it real. But then again, the original hadn't felt real either, until the funerals. Panic fed panic. In 2053, a brewery in Glasgow accidentally mislabeled a batch, leading to rumors that Christmas ale was killing again. The truth? Nothing but a logistical error. The effect? Riots outside supermarkets. Thousands of gallons of beer poured into gutters by mobs chanting, "No more arsenic." Police clashed with protesters holding mugs painted with skulls. For weeks afterward, pubs stood empty. Economists called it irrational hysteria. Folklorists called it predictable. Ghosts, after all, only need belief to resurrect. Then came the accidents people couldn't laugh off. In 2055, a Christmas market in Berlin set up a haunted alehouse attraction, actors faking convulsions, green smoke machines billowing. But halfway through the night, 2 tourists collapsed for real. Their drinks tested clean, but whispers spread that the spirits had punished the mockery. Hashtags exploded. Real arsenic Christmas. The following year, attendance at the same market doubled. Fear sells better than mulled wine. Governments responded clumsily. Public health officials launched campaigns with slogans like, "Beer is safe, ghosts aren't real." But the more they insisted, the less anyone believed them. After all, governments had lied before. And the poisoned Christmas had taught generations one bitter truth. Sweetness always hides poison. Protest groups staged marches with mugs held high, chanting for stricter regulations, even though regulations were already stricter than ever. Truth didn't matter. The chant did. Meanwhile, digital cults like the Bitter Congregation thrived in the chaos. They claimed every outbreak was prophecy fulfilled, every fainting tourist proof the spirits were stirring again. Their Christmas Eve live streams grew massive. Millions of viewers watching as congregants lit candles, raised mugs, and chanted the old lines, "Sweetness kills, joy has teeth." Clips went viral even among skeptics. Some watched to laugh, others to feel chills, others just to belong. But each view, each share, each repetition was another sip for the ghosts. And if legends feed on memory, then the poisoned Christmas was drunker than ever. And then, December 24th, 2057, a cargo ship in the Atlantic carrying industrial sugar mysteriously caught fire. Emergency crews battled for hours, but the blaze burned green, choking sailors with toxic fumes. Videos spread online, sickly emerald flames lighting the ocean night. Within minutes, hashtags exploded. Arsenic on the water. Christmas burns green. Scientists blamed a chemical reaction in the storage hold. Believers knew better. They said the ghosts had returned, setting fire to sugar shipments as revenge. Nobody could prove it. Nobody needed to. The poisoned Christmas didn't require arsenic anymore. It required fear, and fear it had in abundance. Manchester itself became a pilgrimage site for the anxious and the curious. Every December, crowds gathered at the giant iron mug monument, leaving offerings of sugar packets, beer cans, even handwritten names of loved ones lost to unrelated tragedies. The site became half memorial, half circus. Vendors sold safety charms shaped like mugs. Street preachers shouted that arsenic would return unless people repented of their greed. And every night, as candles flickered, someone swore they smelled that faint metallic sweetness in the air. Police reports even logged it. Crowd disturbance due to alleged poison scent. History was breathing again. Corporations, sensing profit, launched poison-free Christmas campaigns. Sugar brands slapped ghost symbols on their packaging with slogans like, "Not haunted, guaranteed." Breweries sold blessed batches with QR codes linking to live purity tests. But even purity became suspicious. Was the QR code real? Was the ghost symbol itself cursed? Fear had no antidote. It only fermented stronger. The bitter congregation declared 2059 the year of return. Their leaders prophesied that on Christmas Eve, the poisoned ale would flow again, not by accident, but by fate. Forums buzzed with countdowns. Live streams hit record numbers. Nothing happened, of course. No arsenic. No deaths. But the lack of disaster was explained as proof of faith. The congregation had held the ghosts at bay with their rituals. Skeptics rolled their eyes. Believers nodded solemnly. And so the poisoned Christmas gained another layer, another interpretation. Another year of endurance. By the 2060s, you couldn't tell whether people were afraid, amused, or reverent anymore. Maybe all three. The poisoned Christmas had become a mirror, reflecting whatever people brought to it. Fear of contamination, distrust of corporations, hunger for belonging, love of dark humor. And every December, whether you believed or not, you couldn't escape it. It haunted billboards, feeds, festivals, conversations. It slipped into dreams and ads alike. And maybe that was the true horror. Not that arsenic once poisoned a city, but that the memory had poisoned time itself. One accident in 1850 had fermented into centuries of paranoia, performance, and prayer. And it wasn't stopping. Not now. Not ever. So tonight, if your mug feels heavy, if your drink tastes sweet, if the laughter around you suddenly sounds thin, pause. Listen. Somewhere in the crowd, beneath the music and fireworks, you might hear it. Coughing. Low, ragged, endless. The sound of Manchester reminding the world that joy always comes at a cost. By the 2070s, the poisoned Christmas had stopped being just a ghost story. It had become a civic calendar event, a ritual embedded into culture the way fireworks belong to New Year's Eve. No one called it myth anymore. They called it tradition. Cities across the world held safe ale festivals every December, where entire neighborhoods toasted with mugs labeled arsenic-free. Families lit candles not just for nativity scenes, but for the poisoned dead, whispering the mantra like a second grace, "Sweetness kills, joy has teeth." Children repeated it the way earlier generations recited nursery rhymes. It no longer sounded ominous, it sounded inevitable. Governments finally gave in and legislated around the legend. The European Union passed the Purity and Memory Act of 2072, requiring all breweries to run annual arsenic tests on Christmas batches, not because arsenic was still a risk, but because the public demanded ritual reassurance. The United States declared December 23rd Remembrance of Poison Day, a half-holiday marked by lectures in schools about Manchester 1850. Japan turned it into theatre. Kabuki plays of coughing drinkers and red-scarfed women filled December stages. Brazil fused it with carnival, parades of skeleton Santas tossing sugar packets from floats. Everywhere, the poisoned Christmas wasn't just remembered, it was performed. Manchester, of course, leaned hardest. By 2075, the city's Christmas market was the largest in Europe, rebranded as the Festival of Bitter Cheer. Tourists flooded in to drink safety-certified ale, while holograms of Victorian brewers bowed in apology. Drone displays painted giant glowing mugs in the night sky, steam hissing green. Street performers collapsed theatrically on cobblestones, only to rise again, laughing. Kids wore novelty scarves dyed crimson, Mary merch that sold faster than toys. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Mary, once a real woman, had been flattened into mascot, but mascots keep memories alive, even if twisted. Schools taught the story every December, but the facts were long gone. Textbooks simplified it. In 1850, beer was poisoned, many died, food laws were born. Teachers tacked on cheerful morals about safety and science. Students drew crayon mugs with skulls, pasted them on classroom walls. Some recited the tale in the same breath as Santa Claus, not sure where history ended and magic began. When a few children asked whether Mary was real, teachers hesitated. Real enough, they answered, which, in folklore, is the only answer that matters. But beneath the cheer, paranoia simmered. Every December, supermarket shelves filled with purity guarantee labels. Yet rumors spread each year. This batch is cursed. That factory cut corners. A new poison has slipped in. Viral clips showed people collapsing after drinking beer. Most staged, some real fainting spells, all consumed as proof. Even when tests showed nothing, believers nodded knowingly. Of course they'd cover it up. That's what they did in 1850. Faith in ghosts had bled into distrust of institutions. One holiday accident had metastasized into permanent suspicion of authority, and suspicion has consequences. In 2077, riots broke out in Paris after a rumor claimed a major brewery had honored Manchester by secretly tainting its Christmas line. Protesters overturned delivery trucks, set barrels ablaze in the streets, chanted "No more arsenic." The government scrambled to reassure the public with televised tests, but it didn't matter. A single whispered story outweighed 100 official reports. Legends don't care about science. Legends care about repetition, and the poisoned Christmas had been repeating for over 2 centuries. Meanwhile, the bitter congregation flourished. What began as an online cult had grown into physical communities. Chapels marked with iron mugs, rituals woven into daily life. Congregants fasted from sugar all December, lit candles for the poisoned, wore red scarves as sacred symbols. Outsiders mocked them as cosplay zealots, but their numbers grew steadily. Their sermons framed the poisoned Christmas not as accident, but as revelation, proof that humanity's pursuit of sweetness leads always to suffering. To them, every collapsed empire, every failed market, every poisoned planet was just another pint from the same cursed barrel. And people listened because the metaphor felt too sharp, too accurate. By 2080, the poisoned Christmas wasn't just folklore, it was philosophy. Politicians invoked it in speeches. We must not sweeten lies or risk another poisoned pint. Activists carried mugs during protests, shouting, "Joy has teeth." Corporations even used it in ads. Energy drinks branded, "Bitter is better," promising authenticity over sweetness. The phrase "poisoned Christmas" had become shorthand for betrayal, used from boardrooms to bedrooms. Even those who rolled their eyes still used the language. The story had infected vocabulary itself, and through it all December carried the same unease. Families lit candles, children giggled at skeleton Santa mugs, tourists drank novelty ales, but deep down, everyone wondered, could it happen again? Not because of arsenic, but because history always repeats in new disguises. A sugar refinery cutting corners, a corporation prioritizing profit, a government ignoring warning signs, joy turning sour, sweetness hiding teeth. The poisoned Christmas had become prophecy by default, warning that every celebration carries the seed of collapse. And once you believe that, you start seeing arsenic everywhere. So now, when the season comes, When mugs clink and laughter spills, when neon lights glow over cobblestones, remember this. You are not just celebrating, you are participating. Every toast, every hashtag, every nervous laugh feeds the legend. Every December, the poisoned Christmas grows stronger, not weaker. And someday, whether by accident, negligence, or fate, another sweetness will turn bitter, another crowd will cough, another city will wake to headlines screaming "Poisoned Christmas returns," and when that day comes, no one will be surprised, because the ghosts already told us, over and over, for 200 years. By the 2090s, the poisoned Christmas had crystallized into a second holiday layered on top of the first. The world still decorated trees, exchanged gifts, and hummed jingles about sleigh bells, but alongside Santa's jolly grin, there now lingered the skull in a mug. People called it different names depending on where they lived. Night of Bitter Cheer in Manchester, the Silent Toast in New York, Festa do Veneno in Sao Paulo. Whatever the name, the essence was the same: joy with an edge, celebration laced with caution. Christmas had sprouted a shadow twin, and everyone acknowledged it. Some with laughter, some with dread, but all with ritual. Symbols shifted. Holly wreaths appeared woven with tiny iron mugs. Stockings were embroidered not just with reindeer, but with red scarves. Mary's silhouette turned into iconography. Children's songs included verses about testing the sugar, about raising mugs carefully. It was macabre, yes, but normalized, like jack-o'-lanterns once were. Death domesticated into decoration. You could walk down a street in December and see inflatable Santas next to glowing green barrels, children in skeleton elf costumes chasing each other through snow. No one blinked. For a holiday to survive, it must evolve, and Christmas had simply absorbed its poisoned shadow until the two were inseparable. Music followed. Carols once about peace on earth gained new verses, choirs singing of the pint that warned us. Pop stars dropped seasonal singles called Green Froth Love or Sweetness Bites Back. DJs remixed coughs into dance beats. At first, traditionalists complained, but by the century's end, even church choirs included the Ballad of Bitter Cheer alongside Silent Night. It wasn't parody anymore, it was liturgy. Meanwhile, food culture embraced the paradox. Bakeries sold arsenic biscuits, dusted with shimmering green sugar, flavoring harmless, of course. Breweries marketed poison-proof lager, with packaging shaped like skulls. Children received candy mugs filled with sour powder, wincing as they laughed. The bitter flavor had become fashionable, a way of proving you could taste discomfort and still smile. Parents explained, "We eat the bitter so we remember the dead." Kids nodded, chewing neon green lollipops, not realizing that remembrance had become branding. Schools institutionalized the story. Every December, students staged reenactments of Manchester 1850. Some played brewers, some townsfolk, some the dead. Always, a red-scarfed Mary stood at center stage, delivering a final line before collapsing. Sweetness kills. Joy has teeth. Audiences applauded. Parents filmed. The line echoed through generations until it felt less like tragedy, more like proverb. By 2095, surveys showed most children knew the phrase before they knew the words to Jingle Bells. But tradition and paranoia remained uneasy bedfellows. Every year, officials conducted highly publicized national purity tests. Inspectors in white coats live-streamed themselves checking sugar shipments, brewing samples, confirming all was safe. Crowds watched nervously, as though reassurance required performance. If a single test glitched, panic rippled instantly. In 2098, a network outage during the broadcast sparked riots in 3 cities. People smashed store windows, convinced arsenic had returned. The outage lasted 20 minutes. The fear lasted weeks. And beneath the official rituals, underground ones thrived. The bitter congregation, once fringe, now boasted thousands of physical temples. Their rituals had grown ornate. Congregants in red scarves chanting in candlelit halls, drinking bitter brews, fasting from sweetness until midnight. Outsiders still mocked them, but attendance swelled each year. Some temples even merged with local churches, blending sermons about resurrection with sermons about bitterness. To the faithful, Manchester's poisoned pint wasn't just a warning, it was revelation, proof that pleasure always curdles. That Christmas itself was incomplete without the cough of death in the background. Technology added new layers. Virtual reality platforms recreated Manchester 1850 in chilling detail. Users donned headsets to walk the streets, hearing coughing in alleys, smelling smoke and sugar. Some experiences even offered poison mode, letting you drink a virtual pint and feel simulated convulsions through haptic suits. People queued digitally for hours to experience death as entertainment. Critics called it exploitation. Supporters called it remembrance. Either way, millions logged in every December, voluntarily poisoning themselves in pixels. And then there were the dreams. Every year, reports multiplied of people dreaming the same dream. A tavern lit by candles, mugs sweating. A woman in a frayed red scarf whispering, "Remember me." Scientists shrugged it off as cultural suggestion. Folklorists called it proof of legend's power. Congregants called it prophecy. But the eerie part was the consistency. Across continents, across languages, people described the same scarf, the same words, the same metallic taste on their tongues when they woke. Real or not, the dreams bound the poisoned Christmas tighter around the world's throat. By 2099, the line between parody and prayer had dissolved. The poisoned Christmas wasn't a curiosity anymore. It was a second layer of December, woven into gifts, meals, sermons, memes. Some families leaned jolly, others leaned bitter. Most blended both, presents under the tree, candles for the poisoned, mugs lifted with a laugh that carried just a hint of dread. Joy had learned to coexist with fear, sweetness with bitterness, life with arsenic, and no one questioned it, because traditions, no matter how absurd, always feel eternal once they take root. So, as the 22nd century approached, children sang in playgrounds, "One sip, two sip, down you fall, sweetness bites, beware it all." They laughed, skipped rope, chewed neon green candy. And in Manchester, at the Festival of Bitter Cheer, the Iron Mug Monument glowed brighter than ever, steam hissing against the cold. Crowds gathered, mugs raised high, fireworks lit the sky green. And somewhere, beneath the laughter, someone coughed. Loud enough for the crowd to pause, just long enough for silence to creep in, long enough for the ghosts to know they were still remembered. By the 2100s, the poisoned Christmas had crossed the final threshold. It was no longer folklore, no longer festival, no longer meme. It had become doctrine, a civil religion disguised as holiday, woven into law, politics, and culture so deeply that no one could untangle it. Nations still hung their lights, still sang their carols, still roasted their meats. But alongside Santa, alongside nativity scenes, stood the iron mug and the red scarf. Christmas now carried two gospels, one of birth, one of bitterness, and both were treated with equal reverence. Governments codified it. The United Nations ratified the Arsenic Remembrance Charter of 2103, requiring all member states to acknowledge Manchester's poisoned Christmas in their December calendars. Schools worldwide taught the story, not just as history, but as universal warning. Cities hosted annual silent toasts at midnight, sirens briefly silenced so crowds could raise mugs together. Presidents, prime ministers, even monarchs participated, televised live, a global communion of bitterness. It wasn't optional anymore. It was expected. Refusing to raise a mug was like refusing a national anthem, suspicious, almost heretical. Pilgrimage grew. Manchester became the Jerusalem of bitterness, millions of visitors pouring in each December. Streets overflowed with candles, scarves, mugs. Hotels booked years in advance. Entire districts transformed into living museums. Holographic taverns, VR graves, reenacted funerals. The Iron Mug Monument now towered higher than cathedrals, steam rising constantly, lit green at night. Pilgrims left offerings of sugar, bitter herbs, handwritten prayers. Some swore they heard coughing in the monument's echo chamber. Others claimed to see shadows of drinkers reflected in the steam. Whether illusion or haunting didn't matter. Faith thrives in the blur. But where faith thrives, so does conflict. Splinters formed. The Congregation of Bitter Cheer preached restraint, teaching that Manchester's poisoned Christmas was a warning against excess. The Scarved Order demanded stricter rituals. No sweets all December, fasting until midnight to honor the dead. The Green Flame sect insisted the ghosts demanded sacrifice, sabotaging shipments of sugar as acts of reverence. Governments labeled them extremists, but their slogans spread anyway. Sweetness kills. Joy has teeth. Purge the sugar. For some, it was poetry. For others, terrorism. Politics bent to the narrative. Campaign ads invoked it constantly. Do you want leaders who test the sugar or leaders who poison it? Trade negotiations included ceremonial purity toasts, where heads of state sipped certified safe drinks before signing treaties. Dissenters, skeptics, or comedians who mocked the poisoned Christmas found themselves censured, even jailed, for disrespecting cultural heritage. What began as paranoia in 1850 had become political orthodoxy by 2110. Arsenic had seeped from beer barrels into constitutions, and yet cynicism thrived under the surface. Corporations sold sanctified sugar, triple-tested and blessed by digital clergy. Influencers hawked red scarf merch, calling themselves ghostfluencers. Tech companies launched subscription services, monthly bitter boxes of sour candies and dark teas, advertised as spiritual armor. Even the most sacred rituals were monetized, streamed, hashtagged, sold. Pilgrims who couldn't afford Manchester VR pilgrimages bought budget bitterness packs with scented candles and QR code prayers. Faith had become brand loyalty, but brand loyalty still feeds belief, and belief still feeds ghosts. Meanwhile, the dreams intensified. Across the world, people reported visions every December. Taverns filled with smoke, mugs sweating green, Mary in her red scarf whispering, "Remember me." Some dismissed it as cultural suggestion. Others swore it was real haunting. The odd part? New details appeared. Drinkers describing names never written in history books. Graves unrecorded. Symptoms overlooked. The dreams carried knowledge no dreamer should have known. Scholars scrambled for explanations. Collective unconscious, AI data leaks, or something stranger. Congregants had a simpler answer. The dead were finally speaking for themselves. In 2115, during the global silent toast, something happened that no live stream could explain. As millions raised mugs, a low, ragged sound cut through the broadcast. Coughing. Not from one place, not from one person, but everywhere at once. Microphones caught it in Paris, in Lagos, in Tokyo. For 3 minutes the sound persisted, thin, endless, unmistakable. Panic rippled. Some fainted. Some dropped mugs. Some laughed nervously, insisting it was staged. But the bitter congregation declared it miracle. Proof the poisoned had joined the ritual at last. Governments scrambled to call it technical interference. But believers had already decided. The ghosts had answered. And once a ghost answers, faith calcifies. By the late 2110s, December was less about Santa than about scars. People still celebrated joy, but always with an undertone of dread. Mugs clinked, but with nervous glances. Candles glowed, but with whispered names. Every Christmas was two Christmases, one bright, one bitter, fused into an uneasy whole. And no one alive could imagine a December without the poisoned shadow. But here's the strangest part. The poisoned Christmas no longer felt like an anomaly. It felt inevitable. Humanity had absorbed it, like sugar dissolving into tea until bitterness was just another flavor of joy. What began as accident had become prophecy. Every sweetness hides teeth, every celebration carries risk, every toast could be your last, and once you accept that, perhaps you never taste sweetness the same way again. So when the bells ring this century, when mugs lift across the globe, when voices chant sweetness kills, joy has teeth in unison, ask yourself, are you celebrating survival, or are you rehearsing for disaster? Because the ghosts don't care which. They only care that you remember. And tonight, as steam hisses from the iron mug in Manchester, as millions of candles flicker worldwide, as dreams carry coughing into your sleep, remember, drink carefully, smile nervously, and know the poisoned Christmas has outlived everything else. By the 2120s, the poisoned Christmas had stopped being just ritual. It had become fault line. What once was memory, then folklore, then tradition, now split societies clean in two. On one side, the moderates who treated the poisoned Christmas as cautionary tale, symbolic reminder, ritual of humility. On the other, zealots who declared sugar itself a sacrament of death, a poison in waiting, a sin disguised as sweetness. And when zealotry meets ritual, violence is never far behind. It began with boycotts. Congregations marched through supermarkets chanting "Purge the sugar." They demanded entire December bans on sweets, claiming every candy cane was insult to the poisoned dead. Governments resisted. Too much money in holiday markets. But when mobs started torching candy factories in Mexico, burning neon marshmallows as offerings to Mary's ghost, officials could no longer laugh it off. News feeds streamed flames licking the night sky, chants echoing, "Sweetness kills, joy has teeth." Commentators muttered, "It's only folklore." But folklore with fire spreads fast. Next came assassinations. In 2127, a CEO of a global sugar corporation collapsed mid-speech, poisoned not by arsenic, but by a cult member slipping cyanide into his glass. The act was live-streamed with the caption, "Justice for Manchester." Millions watched in horror. Millions more whispered, "Poetic." Within days, rival cult factions claimed responsibility, each insisting their ritual had summoned the ghost into the CEO's throat. Stock markets plummeted. Politicians scrambled to condemn the act while still performing the silent toast for their citizens. Hypocrisy dripped thicker than syrup. International tensions hardened. Countries with strong bitter congregations pushed for global sugar regulation, branding opponents as enablers of poison. Others mocked them as fearmongers exploiting ghosts. The United Nations convened emergency sessions where delegates raised mugs of water instead of wine, some coughing theatrically to make their point. Treaties fractured, alliances soured. By 2130, sugar trade itself was political powder keg. Nations blockaded shipments, claiming contaminated barrels were curses. Pirate crews in the Pacific hijacked tankers, painting skulls on the hulls. Reporters called it the Sweet Wars. Meanwhile, rituals deepened. Congregations no longer just fasted from sugar, they fasted from joy. Weddings postponed until January. Laughter forbidden in temples. Red scarves worn like uniforms. Children taught to spit out candy offered in playgrounds, chanting "better bitter than buried." To outsiders it looked like madness. To insiders it was devotion, survival through sorrow. The poisoned Christmas was no longer about memory, it was about identity, and identity is contagious. Splinter sects multiplied. The Green Flame Brotherhood staged cyber attacks on breweries, making purity labels display tainted in blood-red text. The Order of the Empty Mug demanded abstinence from alcohol entirely, preaching that any toast was an invitation for ghosts. The Scarved Pilgrims marched across Europe, leaving sugar trails on highways, daring police to sweep them. Each claimed the true faith. Each accused the others of betraying the poisoned dead. Division multiplied like yeast in barrels. Manchester itself became ground zero. Pilgrims flooded its streets, kneeling before the Iron Mug Monument as though it were altar. But rival sects clashed violently. One year, the silent toast ended in chaos. Tear gas hissing, scarves torn, mugs shattered across cobblestones. Tourists fled. News anchors replayed the coughing chants like war drums. The city council begged for calm. No one listened. Manchester, once birthplace of the legend, had become its battlefield. Governments struggled, some tried appeasement, creating bitter ministries to regulate December rituals. Others cracked down, banning congregations outright. But bans only fed martyrdom. Every arrest was spun into proof of conspiracy. The governments want us poisoned again. Every denial echoed Manchester 1850s silence. Truth collapsed under repetition. And through it all, every December, people still lit candles, still raised mugs, still whispered Mary's name into the night. Faith and fear kept feeding each other in an endless loop. By 2135, global leaders signed the Treaty of Bitter Cheer, a desperate attempt to prevent escalation. It mandated transparency in sugar trade, international purity testing, and recognition of December rituals as intangible world heritage. But extremists scoffed. They didn't want regulation. They wanted surrender. And surrender never comes easy when corporations smell profit and believers smell ghosts. Within months, more riots flared. Within years, the treaty was paper ash, and the dreams grew darker. People reported not just taverns, but visions of cities choking, oceans foaming green, entire nations coughing as if the world itself had swallowed arsenic. Children woke screaming, claiming Mary's scarf was wrapped around their throats. Psychologists said mass hysteria. Folklorists said prophecy. Congregants said warning. But everyone agreed. December had never felt so heavy. So now, at the close of the 2130s, every Christmas carries two faces, one smiling, bright with gifts and lights, the other coughing, whispering warnings from Manchester's graves. Families still unwrap presents, still sing carols, but always with mugs raised cautiously, eyes glancing toward the shadows. Governments still promise safety, corporations still brand sweetness, zealots still demand purges. And through it all, the poisoned Christmas grows, year by year, sip by sip, because legends don't need truth, they need repetition, and repetition is endless. So tonight, when you lift your glass, when you taste sugar on your tongue, when you laugh at a joke too loudly, remember, somewhere a congregation kneels, chanting your laughter into silence. Somewhere a child wakes screaming of red scarves. Somewhere a city prepares for another riot. And somewhere in Manchester's iron mug, the steam rises greener than ever. By the 2140s, the poisoned Christmas had become more than religion, more than ritual. It was economy. Entire industries bent under its shadow, either catering to the bitterness or fleeing from it. Economists gave it a name, the era of the imago. Markets rose and fell not on gold or oil, but on sugar and bitterness, traded like rival currencies. Sweetness became suspect, bitterness became chic, and Manchester's ghost wasn't just haunting, it was profiting. The shift began subtly. Food corporations noticed consumers buying less sugar in December, preferring sour candies, black teas, bitter coffees. Brands leaned in. Ads screamed, "Bitter is better. Bitter is honest. Sweetness lies." Supermarkets sold bitter cheer bundles, gift baskets of vinegar chips, sour fruit, unsweetened chocolate. Influencers filmed themselves gagging on extreme sour drops, tears running down their faces, before laughing. This is how we remember the poisoned. The challenge went viral, making bitterness not just ritual but entertainment. Children grew up associating December with puckered lips instead of candy canes. But bitterness didn't stop at food. Fashion embraced it. Red scarf lines dominated winter markets, embroidered with skeletal mugs or the phrase "joy has teeth." Luxury brands launched entire collections of arsenic chic, muted greens, coal blacks, scarf reds. Catwalks staged coughing models as performance art. Even perfume shifted, bottles marketed as metallic frost or ashen cheer. The scent of burnt sugar, once nausea, now bottled as nostalgia. Economists tracked it like weather. Global sugar demand plummeted every December, crashing markets in cane-growing nations. Some pivoted, branding exports as ritual sugar, packaged in black bags stamped with skulls, sold at triple price to bitter congregation temples. Others suffered revolts, farmers torching fields rather than harvest cursed sweetness. In places like Brazil and the Philippines, protests chanted, "We will not feed the poison." Governments subsidized bitterness crops instead, citrus groves, coffee plantations, hop farms. The world economy tilted sour. Meanwhile, Manchester thrived as capital of bitterness. The Festival of Bitter Cheer dwarfed every other holiday market on earth. Its economy rivaled entire nations, fueled by mugs, scarves, and poison-free brews. VR pilgrimages to 1850 Manchester generated billions, with premium convulsion mode packages for thrill seekers. Souvenir shops sold green sugar crystals under glass, replicas of the arsenic batch, priced higher than diamonds. Critics raged. Pilgrims bought anyway. By 2145, analysts called Manchester the Vatican of bitterness, but where money flows, corruption follows. Counterfeiters flooded markets with fake ritual goods, scarves dyed with toxic chemicals, sugar crystals laced with actual contaminants. In 2147, hundreds fell ill in Istanbul after consuming black market ritual sugar. Investigations found arsenic, not deliberate, just sloppy processing, but tabloids roared, "The ghosts return." Congregations hailed it as prophecy fulfilled. Governments panicked, stock markets crashed again, all because of a rumor wrapped in ritual. Technology only amplified it. AI platforms churned out infinite variations of poisoned Christmas stories, bedtime whispers, horror epics, animated tavern dramas. People streamed them while commuting, while cooking, while sleeping. Smart homes even came with seasonal bitter cheer modes. Dim lights, faint coughs piped through speakers, mugs glowing softly on countertops. Families lived in simulations of haunting, half-believing, half-laughing, fully consuming. The poisoned Christmas wasn't just remembered, it was engineered into daily life. Yet cracks appeared. Not everyone wanted to live in the era of the Imago. Youth movements emerged, calling themselves the Sweet Rebellion. Teenagers snuck candy canes into bitter congregation ceremonies, filmed themselves eating cupcakes in December as acts of defiance. Their slogan spread, "Sweetness lives." Authorities dismissed them as childish. Congregants branded them blasphemous. But the rebellion grew because nothing tempts like forbidden sugar. Conflicts followed. Congregation zealots vandalized bakeries, torching candy shops. Rebellion cells retaliated, splattering syrup across temple doors. Street clashes erupted, scarves red against candy wrappers white. Videos circulated of children beaten for licking lollipops in December. Public opinion split. Was sweetness resistance? Was bitterness survival? Or had the world simply poisoned itself with the memory of poison? Amid this chaos, dreams intensified again. Not just taverns, not just coughing, entire cities choking under arsenic clouds, oceans boiling green, voices whispering new warnings. Not just sweetness, not just Christmas. All joy curdles. Believers declared this global prophecy. Scientists tried explaining it as cultural contagion, but when millions across continents described the same dream, down to the metallic taste in their mouths, even skeptics hesitated. Fear spreads faster than facts. By 2149, the poisoned Christmas was no longer seasonal. It was permanent. Scarves sold year-round. Mugs stayed on tables past January. Rituals crept into weddings, funerals, even births. Babies swaddled in red cloth. Mothers whispering sweetness kills into newborn ears. December was no longer boundary. Every month risked tasting of arsenic. And still, every year on Christmas Eve, the same ritual returned. Mugs raised, candles lit, voices chanting worldwide. For some, it was comfort. For others, dread. For all, it was unavoidable. Because the poisoned Christmas had grown larger than belief, larger than truth, larger than time. It was tradition, economy, law, rebellion. It was humanity's bitter inheritance. So when the lights flicker this December, when your drink tastes strange, when your laughter feels thin, remember this. You are not just drinking, you are investing. Every sip, every scarf, every story feeds the machine of bitterness. And maybe one day, when sweetness finally disappears from the world, the poisoned Christmas will smile. Because that was its prophecy all along. Not just to poison a city, but to poison joy forever. By the 2150s, bitterness wasn't just an aesthetic or an economy. It was a worldview. Generations had grown up in the era do Imago, never knowing a Christmas untouched by coughing chants, poisoned mugs, or fearful laughter. Sweetness itself became suspect, not just in food but in life. Politicians preached it, teachers drilled it, families whispered it. Too much joy is dangerous. Sweetness hides teeth. The poisoned Christmas had metastasized into philosophy, and humanity had swallowed it whole. The first signs were subtle. Comedy clubs closed in December, their stages silent under banners reading, "Respect the poisoned." Birthday parties postponed until January. Too much cheer declared unwise during the bitter season. Weddings avoided December entirely. To marry during the poisoned month was seen as courting disaster. People stopped wishing each other Merry Christmas. Instead, the greeting shifted. Bitter blessings. Sarcasm turned sacred. By 2155, entire cultures leaned into it. In Europe, children's bedtime stories ended not with happily ever after, but with bitterness keeps you safe. In Asia, couples exchanged sour fruits as love tokens, proof their bond could withstand discomfort. In Africa, December markets sold bitterness charms, carved mugs, scarlet threads, packets of dried citrus. Across the world, December joy was no longer about gifts, but endurance. Joyless together became the new festive motto. Religions adapted too. Catholic Mass in December now included a litany of poison, priests chanting the names of Manchester's dead alongside saints. Mosques folded the warning of sweetness into sermons, teaching moderation as holy duty. Even secular states adopted the language, governments warning against toxic optimism in official bulletins. Everywhere, Joy became suspicion, laughter became liability. The poisoned Christmas had done what no empire, no ideology, no war had ever achieved. It convinced humanity to distrust happiness itself, and yet, economies thrived on it. Bitter products dominated shelves, vinegar candies, unsweetened teas, sour wines. Joyless feasts became fashionable. Tables spread with bitter herbs, black bread, sour soups. Corporations branded it as health and virtue. Sweetness rots, bitterness endures. Parents bragged about raising bitter, strong children, immune to sugar, immune to illusions. Joy was framed as weakness, bitterness as strength. Even advertising jingles sang in minor keys, their slogans solemn as scripture. But cracks widened. Youth rebellions flared, fueled by forbidden sugar. The sweet underground spread contraband candy like narcotics, selling lollipops in alleys, smuggling chocolate across borders. Their graffiti read, "Let us laugh, let us live." Governments cracked down hard, branding them heretics, poisoners of the poisoned. Congregations staged public sugar burnings. Mountains of sweets set ablaze in plazas as crowds chanted, "Purge the joy." Yet the rebellion grew, because the sweeter the ban, the sharper the craving. Dreams sharpened too. No longer just taverns, no longer just coughing. Entire generations reported visions of futures without joy. Streets silent, children expressionless, families eating in silence. In the dreams, Mary's red scarf hung in the air like a warning banner, her voice repeating, "You chose this." Believers called it prophecy fulfilled. Rebels called it nightmare. But either way, it spread. Psychologists tried blaming cultural suggestion. But when millions dream the same scarlet scarf, science starts sounding hollow. By 2160, December was indistinguishable from morning. Candles filled streets, red scarves covered shoulders, music slowed, laughter hushed, bitterness ruled. Children grew up not expecting joy but fearing it. Historians called it the institutionalization of dread. Folklorists whispered that Manchester's ghosts had won, not by killing, but by teaching humanity to kill its own happiness. And maybe they had. Because once you believe joy hides poison, you can never taste sweetness the same way again. But here's the cruel irony. The poisoned Christmas hadn't erased joy. It had twisted it. People still laughed, but bitterly. Still feasted, but sourly. Still sang, but in minor keys. Joy had become parody, self-aware and sarcastic, forever shadowed by coughing. The holiday wasn't joyless. It was joy with teeth bared, laughter that cuts, sweetness that stings. Humanity hadn't stopped celebrating. It had just decided celebration must always be dangerous. By 2165, rituals codified globally. Midnight silent toasts streamed in every city, mugs raised, voices chanting, "Sweetness kills, joy has teeth." The United Nations mandated December 24th as the Night of Bitter Cheer, a universal commemoration. Nations that resisted found themselves isolated, accused of poison denial. Even resistance was shaped by the poisoned Christmas. There was no outside anymore. Everyone lived under its red scarf. So when the bells ring this century, when the mugs clink in every home, when children recite "Better bitter than buried" before bed, ask yourself, is this survival or surrender? Did humanity learn from Manchester, or did it let Manchester's poison spread into its soul? Because whether you whisper prayers or chew sour candies, whether you laugh bitterly or weep in silence, you are part of it. The poisoned Christmas doesn't need arsenic anymore. It doesn't even need beer. It has us. And that may be the most poisonous truth of all. By the 2170s, the poisoned Christmas had stopped being one faith. It fractured into 100. What began as a shared ritual of remembrance had splintered into warring sects, each claiming to hold the true meaning of bitterness. The red scarf, once universal symbol, now appeared in rival colors, striped, torn, dyed darker, each variation a declaration of doctrine. What united them all was the belief that joy was dangerous. What divided them was how dangerous and what to do about it. The congregation of absolute bitterness went furthest. To them, laughter itself was sin. They banned singing, dancing, even smiles during December. Members walked in silence, faces hidden by scarves. Mugs carried empty. Children raised under this sect grew blank-eyed, taught that even a giggle could invite poison. Outsiders mocked them as living funerals. But their numbers grew, especially in cities weary of riots and fear. Silence was easier than suspicion. In contrast, the Scarved Rebellion declared the opposite. They claimed the ghosts never wanted bitterness, only memory. Their slogan, "Joy is not poison, forgetting is." They staged sweet feasts in defiance, smuggling sugar across borders, baking cakes under red banners. To eat candy in December became act of political protest. Congregants filmed themselves biting into forbidden chocolate, whispering Mary's name with sugared lips. Millions watched, torn between envy and disgust. For the first time in a century, sweetness became rebellion. Between these poles stretched dozens of sects. The Green Flame sect believed bitterness was holy fire, purging corruption. They staged arson attacks on candy factories, calling flames sugar smoke offerings. The Order of the Metallic Tongue taught that only by tasting bitter herbs daily could one remain pure. The Red Scarf liberals preached moderation. Laugh, but not too loudly. Eat sweets, but only after midnight to balance the poison. Every December, factions clashed in streets, mugs shattering, scarves ripped, chants colliding. Manchester became battlefield of interpretations. Governments tried to arbitrate but failed. Laws mandating bitter observance satisfied zealots but enraged rebels. Bans on sugar smuggling fueled black markets. Riot police became December's second tradition, their shields reflecting candlelight as chanting crowds pressed close. Every year, the Silent Toast broadcast dissolved into chaos in at least one city, fistfights breaking out as factions shouted their slogans over each other. Some called it madness, others called it the natural destiny of a legend. Once sacred, always split. Economies adapted. Corporations produced products tailored to each sect. Absolute Bitter brands marketed pitch-black teas, so sour they made mouths bleed, sold in opaque mugs. Rebellion Sweets operated underground networks, their wrappers stamped with coded symbols. The black market rivaled legitimate trade, both feeding on each other like parasites. Economists stopped calling it holiday season. They called it the annual bitterness cycle, a global churn of paranoia, profit, and protest. Technology deepened the divide. VR platforms offered sect-specific experiences. For zealots, simulations of silent taverns where drinkers fell wordlessly. For rebels, immersive feasts where Mary herself handed out glowing candy. AI narrators split too, some whispering warnings in somber tones, others mocking the paranoia with sarcastic jingles. Families argued not over presents, but which feed to stream. Even dreams splintered. Some dreamt of silence, others of sugar, all haunted by the red scarf torn and twisted in different hues. And always Mary lingered. To zealots, she was martyr, coughing prophetess of bitterness. To rebels, she was victim turned saint of joy. To moderates, she was just symbol, emptied of humanity. But to those who still whispered her name alone in candlelight, she was ghost caught between all sides, laughing bitterly at how far the world had wandered from one poisoned pint. By 2175, the fractures turned violent. The bitter purges swept through several cities, zealot mobs smashing candy shops, dragging rebels into the streets. Retaliation followed. Rebels bombed bitter congregation temples, leaving rappers as calling cards. Governments declared martial law in December, curfews enforced, drones patrolling candlelit plazas. But control was illusion. Faith can't be policed, only multiplied. And every crackdown only gave sects new martyrs, new fuel. Manchester's festival of bitter cheer became ground zero. What had once been carnival now resembled war zone. Barricades around the Iron Mug monument. Pilgrims searched for sugar contraband. Rival factions shouting prayers and curses across barricades. Tourists came not for spectacle but for survival stories. I survived Manchester 1977. Merchants sold helmets alongside scarves, mugs reinforced as weapons. The city, once birthplace of memory, had become capital of conflict. And yet through all this the Silent Toast never stopped. Even in chaos, even in riot smoke at midnight, mugs still rose. Voices still chanted, "Sweetness kills. Joy has teeth." Some meant it literally, others meant it ironically, but all repeated it. And repetition, as always, is survival. The poisoned Christmas had succeeded too well. It no longer needed truth, nor even unity. It thrived on division, on parody, on violence. It had become unstoppable because it had become everything. A warning, a weapon, a brand, a rebellion, and all of it fed the ghosts. So when the mugs rise this December, when factions shout over each other, when fireworks blur with tear gas, ask yourself, what are you drinking? Bitter tea, smuggled sugar, or the poison of belief itself? Because Manchester's ghosts don't care which sect you join. They don't care if you ban laughter or feast on candy. They only care that you remember. And you do. Every December, louder and louder, whether in silence or screams. The poisoned Christmas has fractured, but it has not faded. And maybe that's the point. Poison doesn't unify. It spreads, it divides, it infects. And now, centuries later, humanity has been drinking it for so long that bitterness itself tastes like truth. By the 2180s, the poisoned Christmas was no longer just sectarian squabble. It had escalated into full-blown culture war, and culture wars have a nasty way of turning into actual wars. What started as children trading candy in defiance, or zealots smashing sweet shops, metastasized into national divides. Countries began aligning themselves not just by politics or economy, but by which interpretation of the poisoned Christmas they endorsed. Folklore had become foreign policy. The League of Bitterness formed first, a coalition of nations where zealot sects had embedded deep into power. Their governments outlawed sugar during December, enforced mandatory fasts, and punished laughter in public squares. Propaganda broadcasts flooded the air, grim-faced officials raising mugs of black tea, chanting "Joy has teeth" in unison. Citizens were taught that survival depended on vigilance, that one careless smile could dishonor the poisoned dead. Dissenters vanished, their scarves left hanging on door handles like warnings. Opposing them, the Sweet Confederation rose. Countries that rejected the bitterness embraced sugar as defiance, branding themselves guardians of joy. Their December festivals overflowed with neon candies, glowing mugs of syrup, parades of children tossing sweets into crowds. Leaders toasted with rainbow-colored cocktails, cameras capturing every grin. Their slogan was simple: sweetness lives. But beneath the candy coating, their message was sharp. Bitterness was tyranny, joy was resistance. Between the two blocks simmered endless tension. Trade wars erupted, sugar embargoes, bitterness tariffs, black markets running across borders. Propaganda painted the other side as monsters. The League broadcast images of candy-stuffed rebels collapsing, warning this is how poison returns. The Confederation mocked with satire shows, actors in red scarves scolding puppets shaped like mugs. Humor versus fear, sweetness versus bitterness, each December became louder, sharper, angrier, and then came the candle riots of 2183. In Manchester, still the bitter world's holy city, Sweet Confederation pilgrims staged a sugar feast in the shadow of the Iron Mug Monument. They laid candy canes across the steps, poured syrup into ceremonial mugs, and sang parody carols. Sweetness heals, joy has wings. Bitter zealots stormed them within minutes. The plaza exploded into chaos. Scarves ripped, candy melted into blood, mugs shattered under boots. Drone footage streamed worldwide, Manchester ablaze with firelight and coughing chants. For weeks after, no one agreed who started it. But everyone agreed the poisoned Christmas was no longer ritual. It was battlefield. Governments militarized their holidays. In League cities, December nights bristled with soldiers in red scarves, patrolling candlelit streets. In Confederation capitals, children carried candy like banners, escorted by armored convoys. Each side performed its December rituals louder, brighter, crueler, determined to prove the ghosts favored them. And through it all, the rest of the world, caught between, watched nervously. Neutral states tried compromise. They staged dual festivals, half bitter, half sweet, one plaza for fasting, another for candy. But compromise pleased no one. Zealots called them heretics. Rebels mocked them as cowards. In some places, the dual festivals collapsed into brawls by midnight, mugs and wrappers raining across plazas like shrapnel. Neutrality proved impossible. Every December you had to choose, bitter or sweet, and whispers spread of darker forces stoking the fire. Leaked documents hinted that corporations were funding both sides, profiting off panic. Bitter sects bought endless supplies of purity mugs and sour herbs. Sweet rebels flooded markets with contraband sugar, priced higher than gold. War is profitable even when the battlefield is folklore, especially then. But the strangest weapon wasn't guns or tariffs. It was dreams. Across both blocks, citizens reported shared visions, taverns filled with coughing, oceans foaming green, Mary's red scarf fluttering between factions. In League dreams, she pointed accusingly at laughing children. In Confederation dreams, she tore off her scarf and handed out sweets. Each side claimed Mary's ghost had endorsed them. Each side broadcast dream testimonies like divine propaganda. Skeptics called it mass hysteria. But when millions describe the same red scarf every night, hysteria becomes indistinguishable from haunting. By 2185, border clashes erupted. League patrols torched sugar caravans. Confederation rebels raided bitter temples. Skirmishes left dozens dead, thousands wounded. Each side claimed martyrdom. Each side raised mugs for the fallen. Each side whispered, "Manchester walks with us." What began as folklore now spilled blood. And through it all, December rituals never stopped. Even on battlefields, soldiers paused at midnight to raise mugs. One side with bitter brews, the other with syrupy sweets. Sometimes firefights fell silent just long enough for chance to collide. Sweetness lives, clashing against joy has teeth. History had never seen wars fought to the rhythm of carols, but here they were. Rifles slung over shoulders, mugs clinking before grenades. The irony was unbearable. One poisoned pint in 1850 had metastasized into a global fault line. Mary, once just a victim, had become both martyr and mascot, saint of joy and prophetess of bitterness. Her scarf claimed by enemies, her memory weaponized. And perhaps if her ghost still lingered, she laughed bitterly at it all. Because poison doesn't just kill, it divides. And division, like arsenic, spreads until there's nothing left but bones and bitterness. So when you sip this December, whether bitter brew or forbidden sweet, ask yourself, are you celebrating or are you marching? Are you remembering the dead or feeding the war? Because at this point maybe there's no difference. Every toast is political, every mug is weapon, and every laugh or cough feeds the ghosts, who must be drunker than ever on humanity's endless repetition. The poisoned Christmas is no longer legend. It's law, it's border, it's battlefield. And maybe that's the truest poison of all, not what was in the beer, but what's in us. By the 2190s, the poisoned Christmas had finally crossed the line from culture war into open war. The media, never subtle, branded it the Christmas Wars. What had once been jokes about bitterness versus sweetness now meant air raids timed to December, armies marching under banners of mugs and scarves, and treaties shattered by chance. The legend that began with one poisoned pint had metastasized into a global battlefield. The spark came in 2191. A sweet Confederation convoy, dozens of trucks hauling contraband sugar across a League-controlled border, was ambushed. Official reports said it was a routine interdiction, but leaked drone footage showed soldiers torching the sugar, chanting "Sweetness kills." Joy has teeth as the flames turned green in the night sky. Confederation media broadcast the clip endlessly, branding it the Second Manchester Fire. Crowds erupted, demanding retaliation. Within weeks, missiles answered. The League of Bitterness struck first, targeting candy refineries and breweries accused of poisoning the world with false joy. Cities burned. Refugees poured out, many clutching mugs or scarves, still performing December rituals in makeshift camps. The Sweet Confederation retaliated with bombing campaigns on bitter congregation strongholds, claiming to liberate civilians from tyranny. Both sides broadcast propaganda 24/7, grim-faced League officials warning of joy's poison, Confederation leaders laughing as they toasted neon cocktails. Two visions of the poisoned Christmas, both weaponized, both unrelenting. Neutral nations tried to intervene. The United Nations, already fragile, collapsed under the weight of December politics. Peace talks broke down when negotiators refused to drink from the same mug. One demanded bitter tea, the other demanded sweet cider. They stormed out before papers could be signed. Commentators called it absurd, but absurdity doesn't stop bullets. By 2193, the Christmas wars were global. Battlefields looked surreal. Soldiers carried mugs on their belts like talismans, raising them in the middle of firefights. Trenches echoed with chants, half battle cry, half prayer. In some places, temporary ceasefires occurred at midnight on Christmas Eve, both sides pausing to perform the silent toast before resuming slaughter. War had never been so ritualized, so haunted, so theatrical. And perhaps that was the point, because this wasn't just war, it was performance for ghosts, propaganda, weaponized dreams. Both blocs funded neurotech experiments, attempting to harness the shared visions of Mary's scarf. Confederation scientists claimed they could sweeten dreams, implanting visions of joyous feasts. League engineers boasted they could bitter them, forcing soldiers to relive Manchester's taverns until their resolve hardened. Civilians caught in the crossfire reported nightmares indistinguishable from reality. Coughing streets, oceans foaming green, voices whispering, "Choose bitter, choose sweet, choose me." And through it all, economies rotted. Sugar became contraband in League territory, black market prices rivaling weapons. In Confederation states, bitterness itself was outlawed. Mugs smashed, sour herbs burned in plazas. Markets crashed every December, as both blocs staged mass ritual burnings of their enemies' symbols. Arsenic itself, long irrelevant, returned as icon, sold in tiny sealed vials as war relics. Most were fake, some weren't. Manchester, birthplace of it all, became unrecognizable. The Festival of Bitter Cheer had long since devolved into battleground. By 2195, the city was carved in half. League zealots in the north, Confederation rebels in the south, the Iron Mug monument fenced by barbed wire. Every Christmas Eve, both sides staged rival rituals, dueling chants echoing across no man's land. Sometimes gunfire followed, sometimes only silence. But always, the steam from the Iron Mug hissed green in the night as though mocking both sides. And here's the cruelest irony. The poisoned Christmas had never been stronger. Every December, billions raised mugs worldwide, even in war zones, even in refugee camps, even in orbiting stations above Earth. Some raised bitter, some sweet, but all raised something. And that act, repeated endlessly, fed the legend more than arsenic ever had. The ghosts must have been drunk beyond comprehension, staggering on centuries of memory, feasting on repetition like wine. Scholars, what few remained, argued bitterly in journals printed underground. Some claimed the Christmas wars proved folklore's ultimate power, to shape nations, economies, wars. Others said it proved humanity's weakness, unable to let go of one accident, one city, one pint. But no one could deny the truth. The poisoned Christmas had outlived empires, and now it was killing them too. By 2197, whispers grew of a final prophecy. Bitter sects preached that once enough blood was spilled in Mary's name, the world would collapse into eternal December, an endless poisoned feast. Sweet rebels countered with their own prophecy, that once laughter drowned the coughs, the ghosts would vanish forever. Both sides believed. Both sides killed for it. And Mary's red scarf fluttered in every dream, every vision, every hallucination on the battlefield. So when the year 2200 approached, humanity stood divided by mugs, scarves, and songs. 2 centuries of repetition had turned tragedy into ritual, ritual into religion, religion into war. And somewhere in the coughing silence between gunfire and chants, the ghosts of Manchester must have laughed. Because arsenic doesn't just kill bodies, it poisons time. And time had been choking on its sweetness for 250 years. So now when you sip this Christmas, if there's still sugar on your tongue or bitterness on your lips, ask yourself, are you remembering or are you fighting? Are you raising your mug for the dead or for the living? Or are you simply another soldier in a war that began with one poisoned pint? Because whether you choose sweet or bitter, the ghosts already won. You chose to drink, and once you drink, the poison is in you. Forever. By the dawn of the 2200s, the Christmas wars had burned for nearly a decade. What began with poisoned ale in Manchester 2.5 centuries earlier now scarred the whole planet. Cities split in two, scarred by murals of mugs, banners of scarves, graffiti coughing through smoke. Children no longer asked, "What do you want for Christmas?" They asked, "Which side are you? Sweet or bitter? Candy or ash? Laughter or silence?" The war reached its climax on Christmas Eve, 2200. Both blocs, the League of Bitterness and the Sweet Confederation, declared simultaneous final rituals. In League capitals, millions gathered in silence, mugs of black liquid raised, chanting "Joy has teeth." In Confederation cities, fireworks showered sugar dust across crowds as children bit into glowing candies, chanting "Sweetness lives." Billions tuned in to the dual broadcasts, two halves of the planet split by ritual. And then, at midnight GMT, something happened no side had planned. Across every broadcast, every radio, every stream, came the same sound. Coughing. Low, ragged, unmistakable. Not from one person, not from one city, but everywhere at once. Microphones in parliaments, in plazas, in battlefields, everywhere, the same wet rasp filled the air. Crowds froze. Leaders faltered. For 3 full minutes the world listened as history itself cleared its throat. Some said it was sabotage, hacked frequencies. Others swore it was ghosts, finally answering after centuries of repetition. Whatever it was, panic erupted. In League strongholds, zealots dropped to their knees, screaming prophecy fulfilled. In Confederation cities, revelers wept, candies falling from their hands. Soldiers on battlefields abandoned rifles to clutch their throats, half believing the poison had come at last. For the first time in centuries, the world didn't know whether the poisoned Christmas was symbol or substance. And that uncertainty was the poison. Within days, entire supply chains collapsed as people refused to eat or drink anything sweet. Armies mutinied, refusing orders, convinced arsenic lurked in their rations. Refugee camps overflowed, candles burning endlessly, as survivors whispered prayers to Mary's scarf. Governments fell, borders dissolved. The Christmas wars ended not with victory, but with exhaustion. No side could fight when no one dared sip from the same mug. What followed was silence. For the first time in living memory, December passed without fireworks, without feasts, without laughter. Only candles, only whispers. Humanity entered what historians later called the bitter interregnum. Markets shifted permanently to sour crops. Songs slowed to chants. Joy became antique. Children grew up never tasting candy, never hearing carols in major keys. The poisoned Christmas had triumphed, not through arsenic, but through memory turned weapon, tradition turned blade. But legends never die quietly. By 2210, survivors began telling the tale again, not as faith, not as propaganda, but as story. Around campfires in ruined cities, grandparents whispered of Manchester's poisoned ale. They didn't chant, they didn't divide, they just told it plain. Once, joy killed. Once, sweetness hid teeth. Children listened wide-eyed, shivering not from belief, but from the echo of dread. And maybe that was enough, because stories survive best when they shrink, when they slip back into shadow. And somewhere in those whispers Mary survived too. No longer saint or martyr or prophetess, but woman. Woman who drank poisoned beer on Christmas Eve, who laughed before she coughed, who never asked to become scripture. Her red scarf, stripped of centuries of slogans, became just cloth again, bright against the dark. Some children even tied scarves around their necks, not as banners, but as play. And for the first time in centuries, the scarf wasn't heavy, it fluttered. Perhaps that's the final irony. The poisoned Christmas poisoned everything it touched until it poisoned itself. Wars fought, economies twisted, faiths fractured, all collapsing under the weight of repetition. And in that collapse, silence returned. Not triumph, not defeat. Just silence, broken only by memory. So now if you sit in the dark this December, mug in hand, candle flickering, story whispering through your ears, ask yourself, are you still poisoned? Or are you finally free? Maybe both. Because poison doesn't always kill. Sometimes it lingers. Sometimes it teaches. Sometimes it becomes story, and story becomes scar, and scar becomes reminder. The poisoned Christmas began in Manchester 1850 with 1 pint. It ended, if legends ever end, on Christmas Eve 2200, with the whole world coughing together. And between those 2 moments stretched everything. Memory, myth, faith, war, bitterness, laughter. Humanity drank it all, and whether we learned anything from it, only time will tell. But one truth remains, steady as a candle flame. Every sweetness hides a shadow, every joy has teeth, and every Christmas, somewhere, someone will remember.